Please, John.
Okay, thanks everybody for being here tonight. We appreciate it. Let's see, we can start with roll call to establish that we have a quorum, starting with Joe.
Here.
Corby.
Here.
Jen. Here. John.
Here.
Juan Carlos.
Here.
And I'm here as well. John, has the meeting been properly noticed?
Indeed it has.
Thank you so much. And John, could you go ahead and read our equity framework and our land acknowledgement?
Verona Area School District Educational Equity Framework is that in the Verona Area School District, our mission is that each student will acquire the knowledge and skills necessary to achieve their personal goals, thrive in a diverse global society, and lead a healthy, self-fulfilling life. To meet this mission, the Verona Area School District will ensure that every individual has access to the educational, social, and emotional support they need to feel valued and affirmed in their unique identities and experiences. We acknowledge that inequities and power dynamics exist in our system such that some individuals, on the basis of their identities, face barriers to accessing the opportunities they need to experience success. In acknowledgement of such, the Verona Area School District is committed to disrupting these systems of inequity. And in our land acknowledgement, there are currently 12 tribal nations who call Wisconsin home, with the Ho-Chunk Nation being the primary group living around Madison. No matter where you are in the state, you are on ancestral land of a tribal nation. As we begin our day, we honor the land upon which we stay.
Thank you so much. Is there a motion to adopt tonight's agenda? Motion from Joe, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Jen. All in favor, signify with aye.
Aye.
Aye. We have a pretty hefty agenda. I'm sure we are now making not only the NFL fans unhappy, but also the Swifties unhappy. So we will get on with it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cody for the superintendent report.
Can we just bring attention into
Yeah, we did in fact.
All right.
Social hip
You know, I was
references
thinking-
at all. That's great.
Maybe she could do for us as a board.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Correct, we do have a very, let's say, appropriately aggressive agenda for today. And before we go a little deeper, I want to take a moment to honor what John just read. The Board of Education, and rightfully so, thank you again to our board for taking the monumental step of allowing us to recognize the line that we are on for in honor of the Ho-Chunk Nation and all tribal tribes in our area. We were able last week to do a full ceremony with the first raising of the Ho-Chunk flag here at Verona High School, and the flags will also be on the other properties that at the Verona School District. So we're very proud of that, both symbolic and meaningful step, and having members of the nation here to perform the ceremony. And it was just awe-inspiring, and the heartfelt thanks of the membership that was here that the Verona School District was once again taking those steps to bring our every framework to life direction. So again, thank you to the Board of Education for the step, and thank you to everyone that was involved in getting all this in place. So quick celebration. We want to honor our girls swim team who completed a phenomenal season with a state runner-up trophy last week, 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago. I've been at the first board meeting since then. Just a phenomenal group of student athletes, and as impressive as their performance was in the pool, their GPA their team GPA is even more magnificent. They take their role as student athletes very seriously, both in their academic performance and in their performance in the pool. So shout out to the team and all the participants on the swim team, and to our to the coaches and coaching staff that prepared 5 o'clock in the morning every time we get up and do practice, and they do it without thinking about it. So again, just on behalf of the district, that acknowledges great athletes for their accomplishment.
fantastic. Good for them, good for them.
So if you have time, there's listed below the summary of the events and what took place in Verona State, and also the years that you have on our team squad as well. All right, next I want to move us to the Verona Area School District calendar development process. I will guide most of this conversation. We're going to have Michelle and Chad join us in case there's additional questions that, from the team perspective, of putting the calendar together, we'll have these two here to talk about it as well. So while they're joining us, we're going to dig right into the conversation. I'm going to open with this piece and just kind of bear with me. Try very hard to not get long and to political in this statement. And with that, in my humble beliefs, the school calendar is a very archaic practice. And this is that. And just from the historical aspect of how school calendars were originally built, and it's a practice that hasn't changed for centuries, honestly. And when you think about a society and students and families that desire for us to be innovative and you work within the confines of archaic systems of calendars, those two worlds don't always mesh. And it leads us to, first, there's opportunity for a lot of problem solving, but it's also creating a lot of problems when those two worlds don't come together. So I just needed to verbally say that, to put it into the space, and I don't think it's a surprise that we feel like that. Some of the parameters that we continue to grapple with first begins with our state law, and it is a law, and we'll follow it, around when you can actually start school. And that is in play, and there are a very minute number of ways to qualify for a waiver. Most of them are around construction, things of that nature, that allow for an earlier timeline. When you look at that, and not a law, but I think an appropriate practice for the time, wanting to have students finish with school, honestly, by the first week, but no more than the early second week of June. It really is a really tight parameter of getting school days in without burning students out and without burning staff out. And we're trying to think about it from that. And I want us to think about this for when we talk about our clear practice and mindsets. In essence, we are telling staff and then expecting students that no matter where you are in your brain development, and no matter where you are in your own life, you are expected to reach proficiency in a content area between this time and this time. And if you don't hit it between this time and this time, then you're supposed something's wrong. And proficiency doesn't follow. It doesn't. But that is the expectation of what we put in front of people, is that here's your constraints of the calendar, and get this child proficient by this time, or there was some type of, I don't say consequence like being good, but you're seen as not on track, or not on pace, or others have been going on. So all that to say, we really, as we think about our calendar process, we continue to try to be innovative of how we can dismantle some of the archaic approaches, but also just being very realistic. There are some really time constraints that we work with. We're trying to put it out there. So our goal is to always build a 2-year calendar at a time. So for 24, 25, and 25, 26 to allow for families and staff to have appropriate planning time. And by the way, if you're, I mean, sometimes joking, you don't need to know, so just refresh just in case we did add some additional slides once we had all of it. So make sure it's a refreshed copy. Please. When we look at calendar development, obviously DPI units, law, and we follow those. We have We live in Wisconsin, so we look at the number of school days that could be impacted by inclement weather. We try to make sure our students are here safely. School day starting this time, it's a number of minutes. We all know the barriers of transportation. We were able to work through some of that this year and get back to a double loop, but transportation logistics impact the calendar. State law I just mentioned about we must start after September 1st. And then we get into contractual jobs. Our staff, our teaching staff is contracted for 192 teaching work days. And our hourly staff that works 7.5 hours a day. And then let's get into this bullet point that I don't want us to miss. And the reason I can put this bullet in, and I actually should have highlighted it, is we came off, even before the pandemic, the teaching workforce or staff workforce in education is declining. The pandemic heightened that, and there was a drastic decline. And we were very thoughtful about putting practices in place. There's a monetary piece, but in the very hard work of education, you have to put systems in place that help staff feel honored and welcome in the environment in that work. And we need to think about that when we do the calendar as well. Because, while we, per se, are fully staffed and we've got over that hump, the moment we go back to previous practices, then we're very dismissive of we should have got to there in the first place. And so I don't want to take that for granted, but we still need to think about that when we're going to calendars in the future. And then we have a late start of days that are crucial to collaboration and our wellness. Then we have those nuances of holidays, Thanksgiving, New Day. Historically, there was a Good Friday there, and how we think about those. And for us, we think we haven't thought about how we can use asynchronous days to help modify the calendar and still reach out as planners, and we'll talk about that during the presentation. And then finally, we understand that around breaks that if you're not cautious about where you put breaks in, that staff things in the shoe. Excuse me. And we're very constant in school year time as far as graduation, and not just graduation for the sake of the ceremony, but we know that our, especially our seniors in a lot of our high schools are also part of the workforce. So if they're not done by a particular time of the year, their opportunity to become part of the workforce goes to someone else that is out there. And same goes for some of our, many of our hours that they work with different jobs or something, couldn't be finished with school to be able to do it. So I'm just going to pause there to see if there's anything that was not clear around the considerations before we need to start the conversation.
It's incredibly complicated. It's not easy.
I think within all of these bullet points, I think we're just, right, these are very logistical, but I think there's also, to Dr. Perry, just tradition. There just comes opinion. And so I think that's really hard too, to feel like there's just not going to be consensus. So how do you weigh all of the things that need to be weighed in considerations in knowing that there isn't one right answer that will work for everyone?
All right. So we did a family and staff survey, and rightfully so, because we are a service organization, and we need to understand what our families and our staff need and prefer. So I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of the questions that we asked. One was about the October break. That has traditionally been a 2-day break in the Verona area school district, and that was pre-Act 10 was the conference days, and then kind of walked into a fall break, and you see there was 1 day or 2 days. Which is kind of historical practice, but also knowing that when you use those days, then they're going to be here goes on. We got to put them on something. And I think what I'm saying is, if I take anything it doesn't become rambling soon, every decision has a domino effect. Every time you make one decision, it will impact something else. So there's no clean break there. Secondly, get an idea of when the first spring break, because some prefer us to go with other districts, some don't want us even close to other districts because they know they can have better opportunities to, for local results and things like that, so they don't want us to do that. And then let's get into the asynchronous question, which I think was a brought up topic, and I don't use the word hot topic, I don't know if that's accurate. It was a frequently asked question with a lot of passion about it, and rightfully so. But we continue to ask our community in totality what they felt. And so we talked about the asynchronous day for on the day that we do staff development for instruction minutes, and also if there's a bit that we have to go, school closures try to go beyond the normal bookings, even in other days, is asynchronous say an option. So from that, I feel, and based on a very good response rate. So from the families, we have 161. From our staff, we have 434 responses. So just quick pause before we get to the results. Are there any questions about questions?
You're doing great.
Well, do you want to just clarify, because I just am kind of too lazy to fast forward my Google Calendar, the first question, the June 9, 10, 11, was that what it was going to be like carry over into a following week, like over a weekend?
Yeah, so this is
Am
for
I remembering that correctly?
24-25 for graduation, where we traditionally would put that graduation on that Saturday. Let's go at what's going to school Monday, Tuesday, potentially Wednesday the following. So we're trying after that. All right, so here's what we learned through the survey. From the community perspective, 61% said I support an asynchronous learning day for students while staff participate in professional development. And 38.8 thought wise. From the staff perspective, you see the number 88.3 compared to 11.7. Similar trends for the snow days for 61 and 61.39 and 78 to 21.2. And while this is a totality, we felt it would be very important to also look a little bit deeper to see how families responded based off grade levels and grade bands. Because we know that experience initially necessary for an emerging learner is far different than someone that's maybe a little more self-sufficient at home and able to work more independently. So when we look at it from that perspective, and I can just quickly explain, this says pre-K and or pre-K and anything that means they have more than one child and they're talking about both in their household. If it was straight bands like pre-K 5, 6 through 8 or 9 through 12, those are the ones that are listed on $20. So you can see there, what we thought might be a bigger trend the other way, maybe a less desire for asynchronous for pre-K 5 who, from just personal conversations, and I think I'm very appreciative of parents having these conversations with me, felt that there was a far more of a burden on families for pre-K 5. The overall data still showed the support of asynchronous day, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to be mindful of the end of it. Even though the data says that it's still, those feelings are real, and we want to make sure that we work with them. By the letter of the law for instruction minutes, pre-K through 5 is actually the group that doesn't need instruction minutes. So we also want to think about that for future consideration. It's really our middle school and high school students that need the law-based instruction minutes. Right? So, again, said a mouthful, I want to make sure we're having good dialogue, but so I don't want to push it all the way to the end of the conversation, but just open up the questions and then I can go back to some more later.
Okay, I'm just going to put out there, just, I think it's really interesting to get numbers about how to present. But the one thing that I think if we have 61% that don't mind the secret days, the ones that do, I want to make sure that we're taking into account that the burden on those families might be significant. So it's really not as big numbers, or equally weighted. It's, but this is one of those, there's so many different levels that we have. And each time you pull one, you're triggering something else. So I guess I just want to be mindful of those moments that this is any month. It may not be as reflected in percentage of. But with that, I know we're also trying to accomplish lots of different moving parts of this.
Yeah, so this, to answer your question, yes, I completely agree with that statement, and I think just fair for our community who, I guess this probably didn't work or watch or going back to the web is that just because the number of times out 60, 40 or something like that doesn't mean that that's a type of right to get straight it's that's, and we still want to those that oppose it really passionately oppose it. And so I think that they come as well, but we also wanted to make sure we got the full story from our community to see what's, what they're doing as well. So, and I won't walk away from the table that I can answer for you, never know, obviously, everybody, that the voice of the people to see, and understand that can think about the learning that goes along with it. Especially the elementary level, we ultimately said it last time, and we'll say it again, that we know last winter, the show, or last spring, that we weren't at the level of grade level of proficiency. We're pretty realistic. And I think when you saw, and that's a shout out to the academic services team and our educators that work very hard to make sure there was grade level work. What you saw go home with students is really indicative of what our staff did at the same time. It seems like we're trying to get that level of grade level instruction plus content to 25 some of our favorite grade students. And that's real. Everybody's exactly what it does. And that's why this class was so hard to do, and that's why it should be so hard to expect it. You may see a piece of it, one or two students in the household that we think about 25 to 30 that are trying to do this, and teachers are doing this paper some way. That's the way it works out. We don't have very much instruction, but we have something
I want to make sure I understand what the alternatives are in this survey, because in some of my discussions with people around asynchronous days, I think there's been some confusion on that. It seems like some people are thinking of it in terms of either we do an asynchronous day or the kids are in school then. Because they think about it in terms of the burden on them and the family, but we have to keep in mind that we use those days, at least the part of it that we're talking about now, for staff professional development that we're not going to not do. We're going to continue doing that, and we saw at our last meeting just how valuable that is and how much it contributes to learning in the classroom. So the alternative isn't either we do these asynchronous days or we just don't do it at all and the kids are in the classroom. They're going to be out of the class no matter what. It's just a matter of whether or not they do asynchronous at home or we find those minutes somewhere else. Right? So when we think about the burden on family members, that's going to exist with either option. Not just with asynchronous. And it's the same burden that exists when we have snow days, it's the same burden that exists when we have fall break or any other day that's normally a school day that kids aren't in school. So I agree that we need to be sensitive to that, but that's also not something specific to asynchronous learning. It's specific to any time kids are in school.
No, that's just important. Thank you, Dr. Kennedy, for considering things that you have impacted. Because also the thing about surveys, you're not always going to get, unless you get the feedback from every individual family or every kind of experience, it's very hard for a survey to be truly accurate. And it doesn't even eliminate cost to family time or stress or whatever to make arrangements for whatever ends up happening in terms of things that are so important to make sure it's happening. So I do appreciate that level of thoughtfulness and around it. And to Joe's point, these are important, but it's also important that we continue to try to find a way to best balance doing this in a way that can not disrupt things and waste them or an upgrade that don't have the luxury or just the privilege of being able to pool level and say, we had a big day here, we'll pay extra cost for that. We have grandparents that are stuck, we're gonna just do that. So we just have to be mindful of those families and sometimes you have to speak up. You don't speak up, don't fill out the survey because I feel small. And I don't know if that number is and what those families are, who they are, but I just want to make sure that we're mindful of those things. Yeah.
I have just a logistical question on the snow day question. How does that work? Like, if we go over the number of snow days we have planned in a year and we make up the time on asynchronous days, what days are those? Are those days that otherwise would be off days or?
No, this is when we get our printers and bullets together and do our best weather forecast and possible that we're gonna, almost positive we're gonna call this and we're gonna try to get materials to you.
Got it. So it's on the actual snow day
That
itself?
would be the,
Yeah. So the student, as far as the burden there, it's like because the student can be home that day. It's not like they're performing the instruction test.
One of the benefits there, because interesting is in the separate students.
I think especially that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's just sort of wondering this, is this going to burden on staff that we're not measuring and to see that. Yeah, it's nothing universally wrong, but it's substantial. But to see that the majority of the vast majority, because of staff, I think this is the benefit of the time is in of the correct aspect or it's just a good thing to see. We hadn't had that before. It's
And thank you for looking that up because the burden, sometimes I wonder how can a staff member be function both having professional development and the economy. It's because there's a significant amount of staff work before and after. So it's not a replacement, it's like how we're using the time different. So front loading to get this ready to go is a heavy lift. And they're providing good feedback is also a heavy lift. So we're basically taking the school day, trying to move it into two different areas and kind of spreading it out so we can honor both. I think there were some different systems around how you did calendar. You start with another, and start school with their own kind of school there. To, as you saw with what we presented and was feedback we got from our staff as far as the power of the window and other district in the practice, we don't want to be explicit of that because ultimately students prosper because of the student that they're able to do. You'll see some of that in this today when we talk about some of the growth areas from our school report that I just wanted to reiterate what you said about yes, it seems to be welcomed by that, but it's not as if they're not doing it. They're working like they are really because they are, and they're real, they are real instructors. That's the thing that I mentioned, not hard to real instructors because it's just used differently.
I think that's especially interesting at the school closure because that feels like I haven't had the time to necessarily plan, and as a staff member, I'm still willing to potentially put out materials for students to work on asynchronously on sort of a moment's notice. I also want to lift up, if it were, 5 years ago, this wouldn't even be a conversation. You cancel school, and we start playing the game of putting minutes on, and not to get like all philosophical, but adding 7 minutes to the end of a school day, how does that actually make up for a loss of an instructional day? So I think that like game of playing with minutes and all of that stuff, sure, you can satisfy all the statutes and little check boxes, but if we're talking about having a day of learning, asynchronous is such a fascinating option that we didn't have in our toolbox. So I think seeing potentially just what a different world we're in, that we can have conversations around, not just completely losing a day, which in my mind is what happens when you just, get the school day.
I was kind of building off what Joe was saying earlier, but some of the other comments about, this isn't a day that would otherwise be in the classroom. Because there's still professional development that needs to happen. There's still minutes that need to be met, whether that's 5 or so minutes at the end of the day or whatever. I think what's interesting to me is you have people for which asynchronous is very impactful because maybe they feel they need to do 2 things at once at home and that's challenging. And I certainly can empathize with that every day. But we see in this data that by and large, people are there are a lot of people out there that maybe don't feel as strongly about it, that are like, yeah, this can work for us. If the alternative is maybe we're not doing anything, or maybe we're making it up in a less meaningful way. What's interesting to me is this kind of then begs the question, last time we had asynchronous and we had some conversations about it, the question was, how can we make the materials more at grade level, more meaningful? And it seems like that was something that we were very successful in. This conversation seems to be begging the question, how can we support people through an asynchronous environment as best as possible? And I'm sure that there's not a perfect answer to that, because our that is not environment. But I just really like how thoughtful we've been about collecting data. When I say we, but the administration. How thoughtful we've been about collecting the data and looking at this and bringing up the questions so that we can get to something that's less noise and more productive. And now we ask the question. The noise question is asynchronous garbage or not? The productive question is, how can we support this data in a way that works for most people in the best way? And I think that this is a really good conversation to have.
And just one clarification into you and Joe's statements. I mean, technically there is a added day, but it's a day at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And then there's a ramification for that. And so a lot of one put in space in there, we can't have day because we can't.
But to get to that day, it's like the day after graduation, everybody's checked out. I haven't had that day. It's not. I didn't like that day. So,
Okay, what may be the silliest question, but I'm gonna ask you because I've been thinking it the entire time. We surveyed the community, we surveyed staff, we asked students.
We've asked students who elected, but there is no other issue about it. And so, I'm not good at survey. That is I think a realistic step. Of course, we draw on how the students think about it. I do notice that and I'm not going to pretend to say that there's nothing like having a classroom teacher up there. There's just not going to think that's and as a both as an educator and as a parent that has have struggled with this myself, it's okay for the productive struggle to happen. And that is the skill set that I don't know that we can still enhance it. So that it's okay for you to have a problem come and grapple with it and then bring it back the next day and say, I didn't understand that. It's not human because you didn't understand something. But that is almost as if you kind of get fearful of like, I'm doing something wrong as a parent, or I'm doing something wrong with a student, but like go through a productive struggle, and I see that happening. That's actually a desired state of education. When you go through a productive struggle and trying to grapple and figure that out. Okay. That's it for that.
I appreciate appreciate the K to 5 breakdown, just because it's showing which age is going to be greater difficulty, right? And I do agree from last time, that there's a huge improvement as to what was sent home. Those packets are awesome, they're very robust. But for K to 5, I mean, I just think the process is continuously improving, that's the whole goal. Every year, every year, it's, we know K to 5 is a problem. How can we make it so that it's more aligned with what we're actually doing and the teachers do, right? And being that various grade levels from K to 5 are a little more independent than others, right? Fifth graders versus first graders or second grader. I just think that also there's differences for that grade level standing, so to speak. But I do appreciate the data and the differences in the levels.
I think it's good to have these conversations, the board official is a good conversation. Anyway, I think that, this is a topic that comes up occasionally in the community that we're talking to us about. And I think if we, every, there's 7 board members, we have 10 different opinions, just, come up with 2 and just, and it's again, and it's trying to balance, the cost of that time with the benefit that's, derived. And I think when we see how that time is used by staff for us, for the last meeting, that's a huge benefit. And just keeping in mind it's a cost benefit balance, but it's also, is it a tool that we have in the toolbox to use? Doesn't mean it's necessarily used, but is it a tool that's a valuable tool? I think the more levels that we provide you to creating a calendar that tries to balance those costs and benefits is the best. It's set on a calendar committee at the beginning of the first service. Once it was it's a risk. So
It's not their favorite committee. All right, I'm going to page to some of the other questions. I think the next one on the docket is Swimmer. I think this one kind of speaks to our community. Spring Break said this, if I had a therapist, was a good job at this big one. And there's a far more no preference in this area. Overall, though, it's up to March, the March 24th to 28th, far away from March 17th to 28th to 21st. So, all right. Next one is just kind of the calendars, and when we talk about there's very little flexibility to accomplish a lot. The orange is the only area where I have flexibility. Really. I mean, we're trying to figure everything out. And I think technically that's what we're trying to look at. June 9th, I think 11 lost you.
Yeah, all right.
We've gone back and forth. Essentially, what that clearly saying is that 3 of the other orange dates would have to disappear, and we'd have to have school for us to not dip into the second week. That's
We have to have school on 3 oranges. in order
3
to
oranges
end the
gotta-
school on June 6th.
So if we see some of the oranges that are listed, unless we would directive from the Board of Education, I don't want to put my career out there for having December 23rd, Monday.
I know.
And
That one I think
having
has to
school,
stay
so I think we
neon
should just
orange,
take
right.
take it off.
Yeah,
Same thing with November 20th.
yeah.
Some districts do, some districts don't. Technically, you can pull that one off. Now you're down to the winter break, 17, 18, pull one of those off. I think we're just gonna go back to a space where we take away that fall break, and that actually, and speaking of transparency, appreciate that is as well. So it's maybe a matter of 1 versus 2. The 14th is, the 14th is in play. We've traditionally taken a break because otherwise you go from
MLK is good.
yeah, MLK, yeah, they go to MLK, spring break without.
Well, and then where is the weighing, not to like dig into too much conversation, but you swap like one orange day and we end on Tuesday the 10th? Like, when is it not even worth, like, is it worth having 3 days in that week versus only going on Monday? I mean, I feel like there's only so much room to sway it all with, it's either all 3 days stay in June or you gotta strip them all
We've
away.
had identical conversations.
Yes.
Once
I mean-
we're into that second week, we're into the second.
Right.
So, I mean, and that's further attention to this, but then there's graduation happening on the 7th.
So now you're looking at possible seniors, and I think that.
Right.
And then-
Right, because in theory, it would be the 7th, was the point, right?
You can do that.
Yeah.
And our devices are going. Especially next year, so,
Well, and just, you, I think, pointed this out too, just looking at December, that we lose the 21st and 22nd because of the date of some of the holidays. So like this year in particular is just a little layer of angst because of the days of the week and the dates with which certain things fall that we can't play with, right? We've gone to school the 23rd or a half day, but it's been a Friday, not Monday, you know, that sort of thing, an extra layer of this potential.
yeah, I mean, that would be so disruptive to a school, or to a family, we could probably could have left the 20th.
Oh, for sure.
So you basically taking away between first, 22nd, and
And the
23rd.
23rd, yeah.
So when we look at the April 18th date, in the past, that was kind of a break between third and fourth quarter, just so there was some break in the spring break and the end of the year. Does that kind of follow with the quarter break?
That was formerly a Good Friday, now that we should that we don't do holidays based off of this holiday. So that's something that was kind of buried into the calendar before because of the on spring break. But we just need to take a look at how we address it, and as we continue to scrub our initial rules that we think that it is actually named in an initial rule that we think before the board that I like to take out because we're not supposed to go for
Because we don't really just holiday the same, but that's our responsibility. So right now, so we would have, for anyone, it would be a day where school is in session, but there would be understanding for students that they are not able to be in school because of religious observance, we try not to schedule athletic events that day. So in keeping with those types of parameters, that's how I would imagine Good Friday, but also, I think it's a religious holiday, would be treated the same across the board.
The one thing to consider if we move this towards a school day is really that communication that in the past that has been a non-workday for staff. That's spring common. And so we have to be really mindful of what staffing would look like that day and subs. Because we know that would be, just like if we were to have any other lever change, and if any of these other orange dates change, we have to be super mindful of what staffing would look like.
I think the main takeaway is that calendaring is very complicated. And happy Dr. Larry's doing it.
I will second that.
I mean, just looking at the length of time, we've just casually had conversation compared to the amount of time you've been digging the data. I think it's just a great, again, thing for the community to see and understand that none of it is without extreme thoughtfulness and care. This is not just slapping dates on the calendar. And feeling good enough, so.
Well, just in through our discussion, to see them on the board members, what seems like an easy answer for one board member is like, wait, the problem here, but there's not an easy answer, it's going to be on size scale. It just doesn't exist that.
And also, you know, I get down here sitting here and as a leader at the board table, with the executive committee, and I want to definitely Chad, Michelle, Marcy, I know as soon as I started saying committee, in this committee, I'm sorry, so, all right, calendar committee, thank you, but this is not, I have to make decisions.
It's not on you.
No, it is, I'm just like, if it's wrong, it's me. This is, okay, if the calendar's, yeah, if the calendar's wrong, it's on me, but I don't want to for our the work that our committee really does deep thinking and gives great advice. I just want to say, share the good pieces of it, but if it's wrong, then
Well, and again, we also appreciate the work committee, because I know this is a huge undertaking to try and get feedback from staff, feedback from parents, personal, you need that, and then it's like Jenga, you play your own thing. And so, you do that, so. Whew, yeah.
all right. So areas of consideration as I close this out on this. Again, want to talk about the historical pieces that are in place, things we got to consider. We have both staff and students for summer courses that start in June, so we need to get available. Our school, some employment for adults and our students, and family vacations. Let's see, with helping them with our period calendar, there's a certain amount of time you can actually do a family vacation that we can't have wellness in our community family can do block that with us. Specifically for next year, just to get a calendar, we could consider fall break 2 days to 1, and then I believe it's writing for school on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It's not something I would like to do at all. And then our non-negotiables that we market it orange, but I didn't have some sort of campaign next year. So I think we should just know what that would be for families. We could, and we also don't want to reduce the number of allotted closing days in Wisconsin. It's going to happen. So for us to run that kids.
I have one question about, when there's potential adult absences, so if there's graduation on Sunday, then if there's not, we didn't reach a certain attendance rate, to have the day of concert is viable. Okay. I just can't imagine seniors being very excited to come back after graduation.
Levers and
No.
Yeah, right.
All right, 2 minutes. Something.
That we're gonna kind of have this out before we get.
Yes.
I had a naive question, because I don't really understand the contracted days and the 102 teacher contracted days. And the naive question, the only naive, is why don't we pay more for 101 days? So that they don't lose anything. That's not. Why do they lose pay if we should it to 1 million versus keeping it 1,000?
So what you would be doing is inflating their hourly rate or daily rate. Having them work 2 less days instead of.
Right. Well, they'll end up the same number that they would otherwise get to. So why is that not able to be done? I'm thinking that's private industry, you do that, or you have done, pay them extra, make it fit the calendar. But I'm just trying to understand what are the constraints of paying them the same, but making them fit better with the calendar.
Sure. So one thing that we want to consider is not potentially the salary or the contracted days, but a lot of this community feedback that we got about teacher pay and teacher pay. So if we were to shorten the contract but keep their pay the same, I think we would have to be very mindful of the communication that we send out to our community about this. Because it's similar to folks in the private sector, if you work less days, some people think you should make less money.
But you're working less, you're working longer days to make up for it. So there wouldn't really be less money. It would be you're working the same amount of hours, you're condensing it. So it's kind of like the theory 4-hour work week. Let's work 10 hours for 4 days, and then you get Friday off. But instead, we're sticking to 8 times 5. But you still get the same pay, you're getting the same output for that attention. So I was just wondering why couldn't that work?
I mean, some of
Where's
those
the legal
contracted days are
contract?
like
markets, where teachers are putting in long hours preparing for school. That's why the contracted days are more than the student-facing days. So that's also, at least from a former teacher standpoint, thinking, if you're squishing, I'm still putting in all these days that now you're not getting compensated for. And there's these interesting balances.
Right, that's what I'm
where
trying to
those days
understand,
and
what are the
works.
knock-on effects, and by shortening it, where we, essentially, how do we still pay the same or more? And make the kind of.
Yes, there's a hidden domino effect there that when all of a sudden we're working longer days, that Michelle trips into our hourly staff on a 7.5 hour contract, and she'd not have enough contractual hours a day to take a deeper use of the students, because we would end up starting school earlier and ending school later. And many of our hourly staff are already pinched this year as we stretch.
So they'll have to be extended as well.
They would have to be extended as well.
Knock-on effect.
And we would trip back into elementary school starting maybe 5 or 10 minutes earlier than we do right now, and the high school getting out potentially at 4 o'clock or later. So there's
Right.
benefits and drawbacks to that.
Like you said, there's a agenda.
Yeah. Right, then you're knocking a couple snow days, and all of a sudden, high school's out at 4:10 in the spring.
Thank you. Yeah, just an area that we have about the contracts.
Any more questions before we pull that down?
Our first agenda item.
That's a good one.
Right, so we gotta, I know, but it's so important, there's so much there.
Thank you for a great question and great conversation there, and we will hit our goal of 4-minute break.
Thank you. And it's just a lot of work. We do appreciate the chance to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the feedback that we get and just our thoughts and feelings, just to be able to come down to the around and see. This is really hard. That's the takeaway.
Thank you very much. And we will continue to work on legislation and getting rid of that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we will.
Right, that's the problem.
It's not necessary. Thank you.
Peter, I almost had a slide done, but I finished it up. If you want to come on up.
All on fast.
I guess we chatted about
Okay. Two quick slides here, board members. As we wrapped up the 22-23 budget, this board made the decision for us to essentially finish the year heavily in the green to, as I kind of stated, make a deposit of fund balance, and we've accomplished that with the long-term goal of eventually getting out of the business of short-term borrowing. We went into this fall thinking that we were going to be able to hit that mark. He was concerned that we were going to be cutting it close, understanding that the ramifications of us running out of cash is we don't make payroll, which is it's like 101 for business directors. Is that's one thing you always make sure you have is money for paychecks, and then we purchased that land for $1.6 million. And Pete all along have been working back and forth with our financial advisors, thinking we were going to be cutting it close as it was. So Pete, the district, when we took over, had actually historically always had an open line of credit in the event that we needed cash during the school year that we didn't have. And that was in place when our fund balance was much smaller than we built it up to be. So Pete, you kind of want to walk through a Cliff Notes version of what a line of credit means and the work we've done behind the scenes to get us to this level.
Yeah, so, thank you, Chad. Just sort of a quick review on what we have done. As Chad said, we've been forecasting our cash, and we work with our advisors, and we look at it on it goes down to a daily basis. So when we think aid is going to be coming in, or when state revenue is going to be coming in, and when we did that analysis and we looked out for the next year and a half after the land purchase went out. We had a little bit of a cushion there, and that cushion almost all of it disappeared with the land purchase on there. So then that definitely made us ramp things up and make sure that we would have enough money to borrow here. So the line of credit, what we're going to enter in with Lake Ridge, former state bank across the and Bank of Verona, we are opening a $5 million line of credit with that. I don't think we're going to need to borrow that much, but what it does is it allows us to borrow money when we need it, up to $5 million. Now, the old way of doing this, we get a note, we get all the money at the beginning of the year, we get it was $9 million last year, is what they gave us at the beginning of the year to make sure that we made our payroll and such. But now we're only going to have to be borrowing on it when we need it, and then we can pay it back whenever we have money coming in. Then interest is due every month, so they'll be charging us the interest on it, even if we hadn't paid it back. The interest rate is going to be a little higher than it would be if we did borrow a larger note, because this case it's prime minus 0.75%. The maximum rate that we can have, as it says up here in the slide, is 8.5%. But bottom line is, for what we're forecasting is this should be enough money. This will be enough money to make us whole, so we'll be able to cover the payroll over the year. One other note too that I did find out recently is that if we did need to borrow money over the summer, we have to borrow it by June 30th. So we do get a large tax supplement payment on August 20th. In fact, we get almost 1/3 of our revenue for the whole year on August 20th. You know, that's 13 and a half months after the year started, so a month and a half after the year ended. We actually have to borrow a little bit sooner, but right now our forecasting doesn't look like we need to borrow in June. The only time we may need it would be January, but our projections right now is just a razor thin margin. As I was telling you earlier, $9,000, where they were projecting it to be $100 some million going through there. Yeah, we don't want to do that. So.
I think it's just that we historically always had this transparency.
Yeah.
This has always been something that we've approved, as long as I've been on board.
And multiple school districts,
Just
because this is related to when
Well,
state
we-
funds pull through. Yeah, so.
I know that we had wanted to get away from that borrowing process, but I think when we have the opportunity for the farm going up, I mean, reprioritizing that allocation made sense in this, especially since it's.
I think we should also clarify that taking out a line of credit is not necessarily borrow. We only borrow what we need.
Correct.
And we may
It's an
not,
insurance policy.
and our need's not gonna be $5 million. That's a cushion. So we're not gonna be borrowing anything for some $5 million. It's whatever our shortfall is.
Do we have an idea of the shortfall would be typically?
As Pete was saying, right now, they're projecting he'll have $9,000 left in the checkbook at the.
Oh, so maybe that means using 9,000.
We would not borrow 9,000 in case someone held on to a check in a desk drawer. We would borrow more than that. Yeah, Pete will make sure we have enough to make it.
So how much do you think anyone doing time that we would draw on line of credit?
Well, right now, I'm thinking we're not going to be drawing out of it at all, because I'm going to be monitoring it as close as we can, just to make sure that we'll pay all of our bills on time.
Right.
But we'll be monitoring to make sure that we won't run out of it, so we're only going to borrow it if we have to.
Pete's team is doing this every day. We have a district accountant that's a huge part of her job.
The first thing I have to do every day is look at the daily cash file and go to the bank's website and update that, so we can see how much cash we have and make sure that we
So it's a safety net.
And I just want to reiterate as directly as possible, that last year, we approved taking out a note for $9 million in advance, which we had held and then paid back. You know, it's not a revolving line, it's a traditional loan. So this is still a dramatic improvement from that. And I think aligns with our goal of getting at something like, we're not playing this game, but this is something that virtually every school district has to do. And it's small government.
And I think we did a lot of building here. So,
Yeah.
And just to reiterate, because Pete and I were talking just a minute ago, with interest rates what they are, if we had to make this investment that we did in fund balance and had to borrow with what we traditionally had to borrow, can you speak to what the interest payments we have to pay?
I asked our advisors to say, what would our interest cost have been this year if we borrowed $9 million a year? And he wrote back and said it would be about $386,000 in interest, plus the larger closing fees. Closing fees about $35,000, so collectively it would cost a little over $420,000 is what the estimated cost. Now, the closing cost for everything that's going through tonight is about $3,200. I haven't got a final number on it, but it's somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000.
Yeah, I think it's good just to point out that we are making big strides in the direction that we want to go. And in addition, we've also made a historic request that is a generational asset of school within the district. So not only are we making strides towards financial goal, but really specifically for the future generation. So thank you for the work on doing that.
Related to that, Meredith,
$9,000. I'm curious how closely.
related to that, we didn't have a slide for it, but we did, the closing went through November 15th with no. So the Lacey family was, again, appreciative of working with the school district and we got our official members. So we did the, Dr. Clarity will have to do the language for the board vote. We have to decide to bring that back up later in the board action portion.
Do we want to jump into board action? Yeah.
That's a super question. So, interest rate is prime minus 0.75. Prime right now is 8.5, right?
Correct.
That's how they came
Well, I
up with,
looked last week when I wanted to see that, that's how it was 8.5 last week.
and that's how they came up with the maximum.
I don't know exactly how, what they came with the maximum, but our representative at the Village Bank had told me to release, the principal release that is, we didn't need the plan. First he said minus 0.5, and then the next time he called, he says, hey, you have to minus 0.75. Yeah, let me get it.
But regardless of maximum.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so if there are any other questions? We're going to jump into board action for a second. Is there a motion to approve the resolution authorizing a taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in an amount not to exceed $5 million? So moved. There is a motion from Jen. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Cordy. All in favor, signify with aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion unanimously passes. Thank you very much. And moving back to.
Thanks, Jen. Next we will go to state report card. That'll be supported with the document that was placed in front of you, and Dr. Hawkins is joining us for the presentation.
After visiting conversation about John, continue to talk about student outcomes. And so I say good evening to you all tonight. The next 4 presentations, you're going to hear from academic services. And so this is the work where we looked at our students and their achievement, both their academic achievement and their social emotional wellness and mental health in the classrooms. So the work that we're going to talk about tonight, both reflected on the report card as well as the rest of the reports you're going to hear, are the work of the academic services team and all of our instructional staff that are in our classrooms each and every day. So tonight we're going to talk about the report card. Ms. Zimshine is our district assessment coordinator, so he may jump in and add additional comments. And then we'll move into results policy R21, which is English language arts. Then we'll have information about security and results, and we will have our final update about the strategic framework. So that being said, when we think about our state report card, it is our annual assessment. I want to remind you all, we shared with you all when we presented about assessment, that each data point represents a student. And so this is our state report card is one viewpoint, one snapshot in time, and we're going to continue to talk this evening about other data points. But I want you all to just remember that behind each one of these data points, there are students that are happy and healthy and performing in our schools. So this particular slide really speaks to the overall performance in our district. This year, we're excited to say that we continue to exceed expectations. This year, this report card reflects the 22-23 school year. And this year alone, we tested 200 plus more students than we did the year before. So in the 21-22 school year, that was the year that students, we were coming off the heels of the pandemic, students could opt in, we had students on virtual, and we had more students that opted out of testing. This last year, we saw an increase specific to English language arts of 252 more students that took the test grades for each of them. Of the 4 priority areas, we saw an increase in our achievement specific to English language arts. So in the previous year, 21-22, we were at 66.9, and this year, 22-23, we were at 69%. Not 69%, 69.69. And you'll also see that same trend as we speak about results policies. We continue to exceed the state average, and we continue to exceed the state average in both English language arts and math. Of our 4 priority areas, we've got achievement, we have growth, we have target group outcomes, and we have on track to graduation. The area that we are paying attention to, not that we're not paying attention to all of them, but when we see target group outcomes, we do see an increase in our chronic absenteeism. And so with that, we have our district social workers, we have a district attendance work group that's primarily made up of social workers, and we throughout the year, we're monitoring attendance. I will say, just working in other states, there are some things around attendance as we continue to work with families, but when we think about our laws around truancy, there's not a lot of meat to us, we work with our families, but there are some places where there are some steep penalties and consequences for absenteeism. We recognize that, and so we are addressing it. And what we're doing is we're monitoring, and we're really working hard to build partnerships with families to help them understand the importance of their children coming to school on time, every day. We're also recognizing that we have to pay attention to value and belonging. Our students have to see themselves. And so these are areas that we're looking up in our strategic framework. How do we give our students voice and choice? How do we help them feel like they belong? More than feel like they belong, know that they belong. How do they see themselves in the classroom? So that chronic absenteeism is an area that we're continuing to look at. I did want to move to Badger Ridge. And so excited to say that Badger Ridge has moved up. So in the past, they were in not meeting expectations, and so they moved up to meet expectations. Excited to say that this is the first time in 10 years where all of our schools, we don't have any schools in the last 2 categories. All of our schools are either meets expectations or higher. I can share the data for that. So when we see this, we have How is that? Okay, we have 5 schools that exceed expectations, 3 schools that meet expectations, 0 schools that are meet or fail to meet expectations, and we have 2 that significantly exceed. So this is exciting for us. Also want to say that Badger Ridge, while they currently are still an ESSA designated school, as we continue to trend in the right direction, the year 24-25 will be the year that we continue doing what we're doing, that we should be able to move off of, out of that designation. We're also going to bring them next month. They're going to present and they're going to be able to speak specifically to the work that they're doing, as well as over the last 3 years, they've had lots of things, leadership change, but they still continue to keep their eye on what's important, monitoring students, monitoring instruction, providing feedback to students, and focusing on PLCs. So very excited to celebrate that. Overall, we continue to be a district that meets expectations. The meet expectations, as I said, is celebratory for us in that all of our schools exceed. Thank you. I was being directed. Exceeds expectations. Thank you. That's being directed. But all of our schools, and so we are excited about the work that we're doing. We'll hear more about the work specific to ELA and our results policies, and then we'll make a connection through one as we continue to talk about our strategic framework. Questions?
I appreciate the communications that the families kind of saying this statement, but I wonder if there's just an easy way to kind of explain. So I know these aren't percentiles, I know they're not percentages, but there's like a little bar that shows well, out of 100. Can either of you just kind of, for the scope of understanding, if it's not a percent, like how do these numbers sort of come to be? Is that an easy enough question to just attempt a dialogue? Because I know there was the point of like a 70 is not a 70% or a C. That we don't have a state that thinks, gosh, C's are great, you're exceeding expectations. So what is this?
The short answer, it is a very complicated quantitative analysis that's done by the state that looks at a number of things. I mean, it looks at, and I think what's interesting here, and this is the deep level of quantitative analysis the state does, it's looking at students who we have impacted. It controls for students who have not been present within our system for a long enough period of time to be able to say in a statistically significant way that we have impacted their learning, and that goes into this. And they also use a value-added approach to try to control for many different demographics and sizes and makeups of schools across the state to try to find a scale that can, as equitably as possible, look at the impact that schools have. And so really where it gets down to, if you look at the priority area weights, schools that have a higher achievement in general will start to weigh higher things like target group outcomes. Yes, in aggregate we're doing well, but how are we moving some of our formerly marginalized students and showing growth there beyond just the growth that we're seeing for all of our students? The same would be true having a principal at a school where proficiency was not as high. Our growth piece of that pie was measured at a much higher rate to account for the work that we were doing. We're not a number of percentage of students with proficiency at growing students over time. And what that means though is the higher you get into more and more students in proficiency, they'll start to change in that proficiency starts to be less and less to make sure we're moving all of our students. And so it really, if you look at those priority area weights, it's really a big part of this because the numbers will grow and go down somewhat in all of those other areas that others are weighted to show the health of our school systems when we think about that. And that's why when you look at the detailed state report, cover report, it's 30 pages and it shares all of the numbers and the math that goes into that.
That helps just to have that out, because I was looking at that big long document and I didn't even really want to engage in it during that math teacher. So I appreciate that we just share that verbally instead.
So ensuring that our schools meet or exceed expectations have been well since we've been in this school since 2016. So from our perspective, after a decade that we've achieved that goal is very exciting. I think it's a clear indication that we are closing the community gaps. There's the work that's going on in the business. And it also reaffirms the fact that, the boards and governance model that have been, results. So there's still areas for improvement, as always, but I think this is a great opportunity for celebration.
I can't believe you say this if you're watching. I just want to say a shout out, thank you to Larry Love, because if you go to that meeting, you can see and feel the culture difference within there. And just want to tell them thank you.
You'll be here next month. You can go along with Shayla and Viola, and you can say thank you to them, that entire team, and they'll talk to you all more about the work that they're doing.
And to tie some of our conversations so far today together, we'll call attention to the very nuanced nature of some of the conversations we're having with the school year calendar. And pointing out the conversation that was had about the idea of, depending on when our school year ends, what they can do to attendance. All of that is fit together. And while, a few days wouldn't necessarily in a major way change this, when we look at data like this and see that it is actually our chronic absenteeism score that is one of the only areas that is starting to go down, the impact of the school year calendar and the care and consideration that needs to be put into that has effects beyond the instruction students receive. It shows in things like this as students might move into truancy, just even for 2 or 3 days.
So the calendar is
For us,
really,
it's chronic absentee, that is really dropped 3.2 points. And so that's, as Adam was sharing, in our target group outcome, that weighted us and it impacted us not overall school.
that's really good enough to have that broader perspective, or understanding of just all of the different nuances, and again, there's that. Thank you. Any other questions?
So now we'll move on to, this.
So before we close the report, I want to say two things. First, again, I want to give a shout out to our staff and extenders for the leadership change and direction change and all that, but it's still our staff in our buildings, in our classrooms. There's a lot of discussion about that. So I want to appropriately pause and just say thank you to our staff for the performance in the classroom, their attention to detail and instruction, and our staff is the reason that our district meets expectations across every building. We came in and we made a commitment that it would not be a district by address, no education by address. And that's so important to us that no matter no matter what your address is in the Verona school district, you're going to enter a building that meets or exceeds expectations, and we will continue. Even though we still have ways to go, but change takes time, but change is in the right way. And also to the back of the staff that a narrative kind of has been out there about that. Again, the data tells a whole different story about what that is, what it is, and thank you to the staff that really worked so hard around culture, climate, a safe learning environment, and for all our students. And we're happy to celebrate that. It's excellent.
Yes, December the 14th to the 18th.
That's actually
It's coming once, it's the second meeting.
okay.
Looking forward to having them here, because it is a huge celebration, and that,
Yeah, that's something. Okay.
Oh, yes. This one.
I'm gonna set this up and you're gonna go to it.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So if we go to R2 and just want to just kind of let you know where my thinking is at and kind of the process that we go through. launch report before Dr. Hawkins presents the rest of the board. You know, we as a team have gone round and round with our data for R2, R.1.1, which is language arts. And while Adams, I can't remember who said it, I think Adam said it, overall, we continue to do very well. Well, we determined a long time ago that overall it's not good enough for us. That we have to look at our focus groups and we have to make sure that we have growth in our focus groups. And while we hit like half we did, half we didn't, I just want to be transparent. I'm not comfortable putting achieving reasonable progress in front of the credit. But I am going to open it up to discussion. We may get to that space, but right now, just right here, I think we're saying that's where we are. And you're going to see some additional data that we dug into to talk about our leadership moves to see if our new leadership moves were paying conversion, and they are. And so that's a shout out to again the work of the team in our classrooms about what we saw. And that's why we do that. We saw there was something turning in the wrong direction. Put a move in place, and then you're going to see some good trends that talk about from fall to spring, the student in a classroom, are they better in the spring than when they left them when they came in the fall, and are they growing at the proper rate? Yes. We, based on our indicators, clearly go spring to spring. Okay. And so that doesn't tell the story of that year. It tells year one compared to year two. And so we want to talk about both of them, but we're clearly going down a better overall for our indicators, which is spring A, spring B. No, we're talking about growth and the student getting better from the fall to the spring. Yes. Okay. All right.
So tonight, we're going to hear from Mr. Zingstein, but I also want to call out our inclusive teaching and learning. So many of the leadership moves are a result of the instructional support staff. That's our CLSs and our LOSs, our instructional, our resource mapping, resource teachers in our buildings along with our ETCs, and the intentional work that they are doing, understanding what's happening in the classrooms. So that, I guess I want to make connections to the work and how all these pieces and parts play into support one another. So tonight, RT1, language arts, each student will be literate and numerate, able to achieve their personalized goals. Accordingly, each student will achieve at individually and appropriately challenging levels and acquire academic competencies in the following disciplines. The BASD Board of Education values student learning and achievement that meets or exceeds grade level standards, as well as goal setting as a cornerstone of teaching and learning. The Board of Education expects all students to learn language arts concepts in an organized way during the school year and across all grades, concentrating on a clear set of literacy skills and concepts that will allow all students to solve complex world problems. So the indicators that we use are PREACT, STAR Reading English, STAR Early Literacy, and STAR Reading Spanish. And Mr. Zingstein is going to talk more about the specific assessments and lead us through this discussion and conversation.
Yeah, I want to make sure, it's kind of what we're looking at before we look at it. So we're going to start with pre-ACT. If you recall, we were before you last year talking about a shift that the state made, moving away from ACT Aspire, which had been a over 4-hour assessment that students took over the course of multiple days, and that shift the state made from ACT Aspire to pre-ACT. That is an assessment that better aligns with what the students will take when they take the ACT on their pathway to whatever they choose to do beyond high school. That's an assessment given in reading, math, science, and English. It's about half the time. It's done in one sitting. There's no writing portion. And it's scored on the same scale that students will see when they take the ACT assessment. And so it's just the data that one gets from that is a better indicator and predictor theoretically of how they're going to do when they get to be the juniors and seniors and choose to take the assessment. And then we have the STAR assessment. And the STAR assessment is given to our students in fall, winter, and spring. That is an assessment that, I guess in its purest form, is used by classroom teachers to gauge progress of how students are doing based on their instruction on a day-to-day basis. Where do they see, when I look at that, where am I seeing gaps in the students' learning? Where am I seeing strengths? How am I leveraging one to support the other? The way we use that in the scope of our board reporting policy is more of kind of a holistic, what the health of our education system. So we look at it that way too. Knowing that our teachers are looking at it more on a student-by-student basis, we're looking at it more in aggregate, looking at how students are going over time. Is one of the reasons we've chosen spring to spring, to be comparing to a common point in time at the end of the year after students have had a year instruction, acknowledging the fact that whenever we look at that data, there is going to be a group of second graders included in that data that were not included the year before. There's going to be a group of ninth graders in the data the year before that is not included in. So it is a somewhat different cohort of students. But what I hope that beyond what we see in the student growth on the hand that we got during the year, over time, we would continue to see that over our spring data. So as students take the STAR assessment, every question they answer correctly, the next one gets a little bit more difficult. Every question they answer incorrectly, the next question gets a little easier. To make sure that basically after a few questions, every student is working in kind of the frustrational level for the remainder of that assessment. Takes about 20 minutes to complete. Same thing would go for would go for Start Early Literacy. That's taken by our kindergartners and first graders, and measures basically early literacy foundational skills. It's interesting, and you will see this in the handout. You'll notice if you look at that first page, you see some red there. If you look at the number of students at the elementary level that took Start Early Literacy in the fall, you'll see the number 776. And if you look in the spring, you'll see 605. Basically, that is representing the 160 students who are in first grade that developed proficiency, demonstrated proficiency in an assessment, and so they transitioned to taking the STAR reading assessment. And so you can almost add about 160 students on top of that. And so it looks like a net reduction in students who met that benchmark. It doesn't account for all the students that already did it. Those are just the students who were listed. And so those students transition into STAR reading, and there are students in three environments at Glacier Edge, Sugar Creek, and Badger Ridge take the STAR reading assessment in Spanish as well as English. So they're being assessed in both languages of instruction. So we see data here that is very similar to actually what we saw when we looked at data on our state report. We see growth in proficiency in the STAR reading assessment. Those are our second through ninth graders when we look at all of our students. We see more students are taking this assessment. We are a district that believes that all students, regardless of ability, we benefit from having this. There are districts that, for some of our students with limited English proficiency, students with IEPs, choose to not have those students test, and we want those students improving this data. Most importantly, because of the information our teachers are getting from the reports that Renaissance can give us for that. So we saw a slight increase. When we look at the percentage of students in grades 2nd through 9th grade that started reading English assessment, moving out of the lowest two performance bands, that is the urgent intervention and intervention band. What we want is actually that number to go down. We saw a slight increase in that number. At this point, I want to call attention, you will see a list of leadership moves that's probably longer than you've ever read in an executive summary. And this is something I think that is exciting because of the level of work that's happening, knowing that when our students are literate, we're going to see them in every single thing that we do, not just on a reading assessment. That supports their writing abilities, their access to instruction in English and Spanish and science and social studies and related arts in every single course they take, as well as an acknowledgement that at the primary level, and not to say that any grade level is more important, that our FAFI teachers, our kindergarten teachers, our first grade teachers, our second grade teachers provide a foundation that students are going to build from for the entire rest of their lives, not just their education careers. And the importance of meeting those needs at that level is going to increase access as students move through our system, regardless of what courses they choose, what strand they're in, and just the importance of that. And so the leadership moves on here beyond the work we've done in decisions around core curricular resources, the work in multi-level systems of support, so MLSS, formerly known as MTSS, formerly known as RTI, acronyms in education, and the very specific particular work that's been developed to get tools and resources and systems and structures in place in all of our schools, neighborhood, charter, elementary, middle, and high school, to be looking at data, to be able to find out in time what support students need. So like I mentioned, the STAR assessment. That's one example, but really it's the instruction that's being given on a daily basis, making sure that that's grade level first and foremost. But then the work our teachers are doing in their PLCs, in role-like time, in professional learning sessions, and the planning time that they're in with, whether it's with themselves or their teaching partners, to be looking at student work, because that's what's going to give us in-time information about how our students are taking in our learning, developing those systems to better attend the needs in time. I believe very strongly over time it's going to continue to move more and more students out of those lowest intervention bands, because we're intervening earlier and we're intervening more often to help build up some of those skill gaps. Because we know our students are brilliant, they're capable, our teachers are brilliant and capable, but have we provided the game plan, the resources, the systems, and the time to be able to make even moves to be able to make moves because this is where we start to see data, when we start to disaggregate things. We are growing in achievement when we look at all of our students, but we are not meeting some of our growth targets for some of our students as we start to disaggregate. Specifically, our students with special needs, specifically our multilingual learners, and there's some overlap between these. Between some of these particular kind of like X population, students in our tweet environments, and some of our multilingual learners. That's work we need to do, and we also feel that our multi-level systems of support work, to be developing interventions, intervening earlier on, looking at student work more often, is going to lead to growth as well. Sure. So then we look at student growth percentiles. And this is basically looking at where a student was when they took the assessment in spring and the growth they're making over the course of the year. And what's interesting about this particular data point is it controls for students' proficiency levels. And so it's comparing a student, for example, who's scoring the 5th percentile. So all the other students in that same grade level who scored the 5th percentile and the growth they made over the course of the year. And we want that growth percentile, it's also on a 0 to 100 scale, is to be a student with proficiency in the 5th percentile and an SGP in the 90th percentile means that they're outpacing 90% of same grade level peers with a similar score history. Conversely, we look at a student who might be scoring in the 95th percentile for proficiency. So from a proficiency perspective, they are scoring higher than 95% of their peers. Well, if they have an SGP that's 5, we are not doing justice to them in our education system by supporting them with growth. While they're already scoring at a proficient level, they're not growing in proportion to other students with a similar profile. And we want to see that number also being very high, and that's something thankfully we see when we look at the student growth percentiles in the STAR Reading English assessment. And in aggregate, that's what I'm actually considering 3 percentage points is critical. We look at that measure, and so that is an indicator that we want. I'm going to pause there before we get started.
Yeah. So one of the most of the things that we've been grappling with around not just our children, but also our overall national data. And we were talking about this stuff, and you have to take our operations, monitoring budget, almost like mentally put them to the side. What we're struggling with in our own minds as far as not just the data, and the other different data about classrooms and individual students we can see trying to put support. We're talking about reporting, is that when you scroll through and look at that, you're talking about there's a point 1, a point 8, a point 7, a 1.2. So there's not, and some of them technically could be green, some of them could technically be red. You're not, when you're talking about that, I don't think we should be celebrating either. Is my concern, is that how do you look at a 0.1% increase and say, yeah. And so I think, the Meredith knows is that, yeah, you didn't mark the no column red, and that's why, because there's much statistical relevance too. And so what is the big picture that we are trying to convey? One of the things that, I will celebrate because it's correct, is that we know for sure with the instructional moves that we piloted that country year and they put in place, and like that, in literacy, the fall to spring season of growth. We have one group, and we presented that at the annual report card in progress. That was students with IEPs that are also language learners that did not get credit. Otherwise, we would have. As far as this one, I don't know, that's what I said, I don't feel saying we met or we didn't, because the statistical numbers are so, what's it mean, that we, they're not statistical.
Well, and they're being calculated, I think, to your point, it's a different number of students that took it, so that like the number, I mean, you're not even really comparing, so when you convert to a percentage, it's still to underneath and just look at what am I talking about with numbers and thinking about students, as you said, Dr. Hawkins, it does feel funny to even focus on the percentages and what's really hiding underneath that.
And it's ethically, I don't want to put something in front of you that puts on a show of progress. That's not what, that's what I'm like, that's not how we like it. That's not.
And also like celebrating though, that things are happening from a leadership move standpoint. I mean, it feels like this delicate seesaw balance of really creating spaces where there's clearly areas to still grow and serve our students, but also acknowledging there's amazing things happening, and even down to the way that we're measuring and empowering teachers to be able to be responsive.
I think one of the questions that came up is, first, when we have a red, failing to achieve reasonable progress, we definitely work that. Because it's just reasonable progress hasn't been achieved. I don't think it's a failure to do that. It's just at this data point, maybe reasonable progress hasn't been achieved yet. And that has to be okay. Data isn't a failure. It isn't, I like to celebrate our successes in it, but I also don't want to look at true data and say, this now qualifies as a failure. Because I think, Adam, as you pointed out, there's a whole laundry list. We have not seen this many leadership moves that have been predicated on data that have been meaningful. So I don't want to take that lens of it. So that would be one thing I would ask the board, maybe, if we can look at what does red really mean? Is it failing, or is it just reasonable progress hasn't been achieved? Because that has to be okay, because it's good. I also don't want to artificially mark something as reasonable progress with exceptions, because then that is watering down the meaning of our monitoring efforts. And I want to be we have to embrace data, because we are, to me, that's a little smoke and mirrors, but I would really rather see just the true picture of it, because I trust so much that our leadership moves are going to be in alignment with what this shows. I think we've had some conversations with the board about star data being a data point, and that it doesn't give the full picture. And I think that's something that the indicators maybe we would take from, admin, because we don't know what we should be doing. But I think that, we're open to receiving the data that we provide. That we use. John, you guys think so?
I just wanted to, I think, we had a conversation touching on this when we first set out on this project about, is there a percentage that represents, like, we want this percentage? Or are we just gonna phrase things in terms of growth every time? Because at a certain point, even if you're like, doing the best possible, at a certain point, you can't keep growing. Like, it's just not reasonable, you know? And so I wonder how much this has to do with this. I mean, I look at some of these statistically insignificant numbers because they have different sample sizes. 55.8 and 55.9, which is up on the screen now, are statistically insignificant. It's the same number. But you got 10 more kids that are making benchmark there than were previously. Even though it's a different denominator, different data set altogether, conceivably you can tell a story about 10 more kids that are meeting benchmark. That's a good story. Like, when you're talking about centering kids, that's 10 kids. And that's important. So, I just kind of want to like have both of those conversations. Like, do we need to do data differently? Like, is there just a flat benchmark we want to look at maintaining every year? Or do we want to look at this growth? And how do we want to think about growth and how do we want to think about success? Because the way I'm looking at it right now, and the way that I feel like we're talking about it, we run the danger of having statistically insignificant results lead us to like spinning endless amounts of leadership moves that might not be directed where we want to go. So I think this is a great conversation. It's probably not going to get resolved tonight, but yeah, I think we do have to evaluate what is data, what is success here, because there are some successes here, and on the state report card, there's a lot of success there, particularly around language arts. And cynically, like, we could tell any story we wanted to, depending on which data we grab. But I don't know that that serves students, so. Yeah.
John has touched on it, Jim has touched on it, Adam, you mentioned it from the start. When I look at these numbers and when you presented data to us before, I always go back to, is there a way to track the same group of students progression? And I think that's where we're really going to be able to see and tell the story about what's going on. Because like John just said, we're looking at, what we see here seems to be centered on growth rather than progression. And when we track the same group of students from fall to winter to spring, from even year to year up into, I know that's forward thinking, but from K through 12, that's when we can really see the reflection. And I don't know how we do that.
It almost makes me think of like the case study when I used to do like analyzing student work, right? And you analyze student samples and you really hone in on 4 students that seem to sort of represent just a smattering of the group of students you have. Not only to just help manage differentiation of instruction, so you're not thinking of 30, you think of 4, whatever this way is of almost thinking of case study. I mean, that's what I keep craving, is thinking of students that really a teacher would say, this student, this is who I think about when I'm planning, this is what I think about when I'm thinking of multi-level tiers of instruction. How do we start to follow and get scope on students who really are, yeah, I mean, when we think of one, we are still thinking of many, and so that's kind of where I feel is like, there's individual stories in here that I know teachers can talk about, and we look at this really holistic data and kind of lose sight of these powerful micro stories that tell us of really amazing layers of growth and really interesting spaces where we're grappling and really trying to process how do we meet instructional needs of some students specifically.
Wonderfully put, because that's exactly the sort of thing in the amazing investment that's been made in Late Start Mondays that is able to happen now across our entire system. And, it would be, wrong not to honor the many, many, many amazing decisions that were made by the board, by those that have been, sitting in this room before us, attending to the best thinking at that time about what it meant to teach, what it meant to teach news. And that evolves. I mean, we're in a profession, and it's exciting. It evolves, and there are people who are spending all of their time looking at how do kids learn, as they go through, and how exciting it is to be responsive to that. And so, I think a lot of this, the investment in our time, and a lot of money and resources in different ways of working is meant to attend to that. it is doing different, but it's also doing better based on the best thinking. And so, some of that is not necessarily, we're not gonna see that yet in some of this because of last year's the first year that our third and fifth grade teachers had a foundational skills resource that attends to the science of reading. We've had foundational skills resources before, things like Words Their Way. That hasn't had its day. We know better, we do better now, things like that. That was the first time people engaged in that last year. We look at kindergarten through second, the phonics units have served us well for many years. And we're missing the phonemic awareness component that we know students need to be literate and are in Hagerty this year to attend to that need. We're only a couple months into that. The amazing coaching our coaches are providing, the investment in the Standards Institute and how that's came back to schools to make sure that every single classroom, every single day for every single student is attending to grade level instruction. And it's really then where PLC work comes in. It's all in here to be able to then look at what does that mean? How does this play out over the course of the lesson? And sometimes it just starts with one.
So I think that's important context because there's some changes that implement. You're not going to see immediate change. It takes time to take hold. There's a runway where you have to, teach everyone how to do it, and you have to implement it, and you have to give it time to learn it and put it together. So it's important to have that context to have us all understand, and parents and whoever's listening, that some of the changes that we really believe in, we're not going to see a meaningful statistical significance quarter over quarter. Sometimes even in 1 year. It might take years. So having the context is so important because, like you said, everything we mentioned is necessary, right? That we didn't have, and it should be improved. But it's going to take time to see that appreciate.
And then
That add up. Yeah.
And then fast forward, next year when we're saying we're adopting a new literacy curriculum, along with the intentional training that we're going to provide both teachers and administrators and the science of reading. As you said, we will see continued growth, but there's still this runway where while all that is going on, we're still doing this.
So I think this is what I'm looking at. I think it was some more thought on this, just from the board and from Adam, because we're looking at these monitoring reports and we're really a snapshot. And this is actually a snapshot on. This is a really, I agree with this. We're seeing it, and now we're making a judgment about something that already happened and has already been informative for how things are currently happening. I question whether we're doing that investigate. Because our monitoring reports are something that's also forward facing to our community. Our community is going to see this, so the monitoring report face value as of today. But it isn't really a reflection of today. And that's where I'm struggling with our usage of these reports and how we can best do that. And it's something I would like to make sure that we are doing in a way that is honoring the work that's happening, but also we do need to be monitoring data. Are we monitoring it in a way, in the best way, or I mean, but that's good. This is good struggle because I struggled with this monitoring report and the numbers, knowing that there's a lot of backstory, knowing all of these leadership moves are in place. This report isn't capturing the full picture of today. It might have captured data from spring. I also do really question, it has to be authentic too. So if this is what we're doing and how we're doing it, and these are the indicators, how do we frame that in a way? I mean, I don't want it to be failure. I can't. So how do we frame that in a way that, this is the collaborative part because I'm kind of at a loss, but I'm just
I'm not sure, I'm not even sure of my own thoughts organized, but I agree with everything Mary has said. I think that maybe this is a better conversation for our workshop next meeting, but I think the achieving reasonable progress with exceptions and failing, I think that's the wrong setup. For results, I think it should be where the results achieved, where you next level would be, are you making reasonable progress towards those? And then the third would be, you're not making reasonable progress towards those. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because then, like, the nature of this is it's looking backward, because it's an assessment of the last year. And then what you do about that is the looking forward. And looking at the results here, I agree with what everybody said. The data here is largely not that helpful. But that's not because data is bad, it's because of how we chose to use it. And to me, it's the growth part of it. It's the comparing one year to another and expecting a certain amount of growth or growth at all, because then you get the statistical significance from. I'd rather have us set a threshold, like John said, and say, here is what we think success is within plus or minus a certain percentage, and either we hit it or we're making reasonable progress towards it. And either one of those is cool. I think that's a better use of it, because the data is really valuable. I don't want to just throw the data out. That's how we use it.
But then the stamp that with a failure seems counterproductive entirely. And I almost wonder, like, had it just been said, reasonable achievement in progress, would that have been an easier classification to make? Because it really just feels unnecessary. Talk about the big red pen on your, yeah, so that's it, again, I want, and I said this before, and I hope this is how all of our, educators are using data. Data itself is not good or bad, and we have just gone about saying data bad. And yet, Adam listed a million ways that have been, this same data has been very, very educational and influential in decisions. So there's a disconnect between us.
So I apologize. I am having to like self-select what I say right now, because having been one of those people that spends all day thinking about how children learn to read, like so many thoughts, and so many of them are just not helpful, because they're just tangents that are self-indulgent. But I will try to self-select some things there. There are a lot of examples where data is bad. I think the common example to not use an educational analogy is that stock market businesses' quarterly reports are a bad thing, because they drive you to push towards immediate results that are not beneficial for the long-term health of a corporation necessarily. I wonder how much of this star data is useful for you, and useful for certain purposes. Like I would ask, are we collecting data in a way that can be used longitudinally? Like Corey was talking about, to see students' growth over time. That could be a useful and a longer-term project. But also, the literacy educator in me, I always used to have friends that were talking about, like, well, my kids like struggling with reading. My kids too also struggle with reading here and there. But like, I would always say, you don't freak out in second grade. Maybe we'll freak out in fourth grade, and there may be some red flags in second grade. Those are like hard to manage, and certainly some students have those. But like, some of this data like gets us freaking out in second grade a little bit, and we don't need to freak out until like fourth grade just yet. And what I'm getting at is like, even this new law, which I will editorialize, I think is an awful law, that requires us to have like a fourth grade reading assessment, where to certify that everybody moving from third and fourth grade is competent in literacy. And that can be like a benchmark, like a data point. But I just wonder about, like, I don't think this is bad data. I think this data mixed with our purposes is not getting what we want. And then to speak to what Meredith is saying, like, there is a time and place for failure. Schools fail all the time. They fail students all the time and bust out that big red thing and say, boom, this is a failure. And we do fail students from time to time here, for sure. But it's not constructive for our purposes. And it's this mix of how we're using this data, I think, and how we're categorizing what the data means that isn't leading us to a healthy conversation about these leadership moves that I'm really eager to get to. But I'm not sure how meaningful this data is in getting us there, how meaningful this conversation is in getting us there. And whether it's the word failure, which I still think is useful, or just the way it's applied in the context of the data we're looking at, that I think is the problem.
Yeah, I appreciate this point, John, especially around the leadership moves. because I think it's fair to say, Karen, Karen's record teaching moment. The way that we are talking about data in this space is, I don't think we really developed a model of what's happening to it.
Yes.
That's the issue. I think.
Right.
Because we, in a POC, we take a score or a performance, or whatever that is, talk to the individual about our teacher moves and the student outcome. And then we make those adjustments in this study, we do teacher moves, and then we reassess to see if those teacher moves are having an impact on student instruction. Right now, it's kind of and we're all new at this progress monitor, we're like in this confines of, I need to tell you how we did last spring, and honestly, we know how we did last spring, because we said it in the fall, in our annual academic report. It's, when we saw it trending in a direction, or not moving at the pace that we wanted to, there's specific moves that we put in place. There's a pilot score that we used to make sure that we modeled it somewhere, and then here's the professional development that went in place, and then here's the outcomes because of that. That's the way conversations are happening, and that's where I guess I'm not modeling the way that it happens.
Well, I want to highlight something that you just said, but then listen, this isn't just, I guess, it'll work, we'll see. There's a pilot school that is, I mean, it's not just like rolling the dice. I mean, this is very intentional work that is being done. So it's not like, well, we'll see what happens in the spring, who knows? And I guess the knowledge, this is very, very intentional in-depth work that's happening. And I think, it's Rebecca put it on the board. And so I'm struggling with the nature of it. There's such complexity, and yet we have this method for monitoring. So how do we reconcile all that? And I don't know that we will have an answer tonight, but this is the first time, especially, I think when we do our operations, it's very different. And so this is the first time we're confronted with this struggle. And I will say, I struggled the whole time, struggled the whole time thinking about it, struggled right now. And I can't quite reconcile the answer. I don't know that the board will have the answer, but I think I don't know that, yeah, we're pretty much struggled. Right?
So just to put another point on that, I remember last year going on at the end of the year, visits, thank you, I was just saying conferences, visit. There were visits at CORE, and absolutely gushing over how they presented their data around literacy, because they had this visual that was awesome, because it was like a line graph, and they had like almost I think every student there, and like where they tested the thing, and then it like followed their line, and it moved over the course of the year. And so you could see like red, yellow, green, and where everybody was moving over the year. And I was like, this is amazing. I remember gushing, but I think I talked about it, this is great, but I never asked for it here, because it very quickly occurred to me that like that would be too much. That served them in their discussions around what moves. And when I asked them questions about like, what's this line? It goes like straight up here. Oh, that's the student that did this and did that, this other thing. That was a phenomenal tool for them to be able to do that, to convey that to me. But we're doing a different type of governance here. And I'm not sure that data, as much as I loved it, was just floored with it. And that particular visual would actually be helpful. I feel like this discussion is that visual a little bit.
So we have some time. I want to make sure we're getting through the rest of our data, but I think it's a great segue, John, because the idea is we trust that one will lead to growth in recovery. In the work that's happening, the conversations that are happening, we trust that the 3 times a year we take a STAR assessment is going to show. The 1 time a year we take the Wisconsin State Forward assessment that is going to show. It's kind of like practice to the game, right? You practice well, perform well in the game, and that's what it's about. Is going back to numbers, looking at STAR rating standards. That's 200 students who are not meeting the proficiency benchmark, and until that's 100, we're never going to be satisfied. We know we can do better, and the many things on here truly working in concert together. And how we're centering our students in our two-way immersion program, how we're centering some of our multilingual learners, and looking at the investment that we were able to make in increasing bilingual staff at the high school. there was an identified need, and we were able to move on that need to support students as they progress into our 9th to 12th grades. The way that some of the work that we're doing around understanding grade level standards, how is that translating into how we write IEPs? Looking at decisions we're making around core curricular resource, what does that mean for our tweet stream? Are we making sure we're uplifting them in the front end, not trying to retrofit a decision into a different strand for learning at the back end? What's that mean at Verona Area International School, and opportunities for learning we're providing as a district to support them with their own curricular decisions within our, just that one charter and some of our other charters. So again, you see a lot in here, and truly, while it seems like a lot, we really focused effort to make sure that there's truly the resource of time to be able to live in these things, not just to learn, but then to be able to reflect and do something with that, and then reflect again in order to change practice, knowing that it's the conversations around the stories and it's the conversations around individual students that are going to help build the learning that's going to be able to be generalized to other environments. Things like co-teaching, we were able to expand that as a district, and so an opportunity for our EL staff and our special educators to be working hand in hand with general education teachers in the environment to both be teaching students together, to be able to reduce pull-out instruction where it's not appropriate, to make sure this restrictive environment in the classroom is done in the classroom. All of those things working together. It's very exciting. And again, standing on the work that happened before, we've learned how to be better teachers of reading and are making sure that we have a moral obligation to take that information and make those decisions. So getting into tweeting, we see now some of our performance for students in the STAR reading Spanish assessment also see slight growth in the students being the efficiency benchmark in percentage point. And then we get into the students moving out of those lowest intervention points, also see that trending in a positive direction percentage-wise there as well. And we see a similar trend when we start to disaggregate the data as we're seeing ourselves not meeting the high bar we've set for ourselves and making sure we're truly, when you say, and I think one of the dangers in language here, you say for all students using proficiency, this is all of our students, and we're not progressing in the same way for groups of our students. And coming back to leadership, we still working in this way and giving the time to live with students who are not seeing that same level of growth, and giving the time to know what we can do about it is the right investment. One of the reasons that this is not able to be reported is, if you recall last year, it was the first year that STAR reading Spanish was given in the middle school. And we noticed that gap. And so we don't have fall to spring growth up until this past year. We didn't have that year before. We weren't giving that assessment in fall and in spring. We have a baseline now for next year, which is why that's something we reported on. And the same thing, jumping to STAR early lit. Again, very different cohort of students, different kindergartners one year to the next. Similar trend. When we look at disaggregating that data, we are not growing at the same rate for all of our students, and need to be doing better there. Again, so many of these moves around foundational literacy feel very strongly that that's going to continue to be for the students, building off of the great work that Rafi does. And then lastly, once again, we have a different assessment. We didn't feel it was appropriate to be comparing ECT Aspire to pre-ACT, so we have a baseline now for next year for the pre-ACT assessment, which our students in 9th and 10th grade specifically took for the first time last spring. And the data that was provided for us, which in the very same way that STAR is being used, there's a lot of information that can be gathered from that within our high school about areas of strength, areas of growth for students, that teachers are students in the classroom. Most importantly, it affirms or leads to greater reflection about the work that we're seeing them do every single day. I don't want to overspeak and say this one data point is going to make these massive decisions for us. Our teachers are seeing every day, and this helps affirm or call into question some of that when we see that.
Questions? Additional question?
It's like a just to be continued that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As we described.
One thing, just, I have just a little question about whether our indicators are the indicators that we want to use to best capture the story. But assuming they are, this is what we have to work with now. one thing that just kept tripping me up, and I'm looking at this again as a public facing document. So if our community is reading it, we're looking at, like indicator 1A and then C and then 3A and 3C. We're talking about, students moving out of urgent intervention, and that will increase each year. And then the number, the percent, yeah. So the percentage though is supposed to decrease.
Yes.
So there's a mismatch, and I think that's a very, even as I'm reading and no one having time to read, I kept hitting it over and over. It was just like that mental block, it's increasing, and I'm looking for a decrease. Can we make it that, if we keep these indicators, and again, that's up to you all to make that determination. But assuming we do, can we make that language match the directions? Because I struggle with my math anyway, and
And while we're on that topic, once again, uplift, one change that will need to be considered is since we are giving you pre-ACT assessment for indicators 6 and 6A, would recommend amending the language to align with the assessment that you're giving, removing ACT Aspire from those indicators.
I just want to point out in light of this discussion, which has very much been about our struggles getting the information we want, that like, there has been a lot of improvement here. And I think some of our frustrations maybe come off if people are watching this. It's not with the amount of improvements in the leadership. If anything, the frustration is that the numbers aren't showing maybe what the report card shows, what we know to be true, and having gone into these schools, that the leadership moves that have been made over the past couple of years have like a phenomenal improvement. So implementing new curriculums, things like that, are certainly bearing fruit. So I want to make sure that that's definitely out there.
thank you. And I want to reiterate, I know that we were talking about that, it's that, I don't feel like it's capturing their story in the way that we know the other avenues is out there.
Bottom line, if the state report card is capturing data that we're not, like, come on, that's not the best tool. But the state report card is not an accurate thing. But anyway,
Any other questions about the monitoring report? Okay. Okay, so at this point, I feel like there's some more discussion to have about how we do this. And I'm wondering, do we have that discussion tonight? Do we table this discussion for our workshop? I've been struggling about how to vote on this, because, I mean, there's still the, we want to make sure that it is authentic. This is the report. And I don't feel like it's represented.
so, Jody, go ahead.
I mean, I was just gonna, like, it seems like we're dealing with two different questions. We have the report that's in front of us.
Mhm.
I don't think we have, we don't like the indicators that we have. We don't think it's all that useful from the conversation, it sounds like. But we have what we have. We can fix it going forward, or the district can recommend amendments to the indicators going forward. But I don't think, I don't know that we have any choice but to act on the report that we have.
That's the story.
I was going to second that. I think the report does what it's supposed to do. I think that our question is about what is it supposed to do.
So with that, if there's no other questions about the content of it, then I think that's the board discussion. So is there a motion to approve the monitoring report as presented? You can make that. So moved from, motion from John, is there a second? Second from Jack. Okay, now it's officially for the board's conversation. And Joe, I think you really kind of captured we have to take a vote on this. You know, the language of our created cues.
So I agree with what some others have said, that we don't think that what's reflected in the data, or that the data that's presented reflects what we kind of know from other experiences to be true. But just speaking for myself, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't vote on this based on the story that I think the data is making for me. And for me, that data is not making reasonable progress towards the results that we set in the results policy. That's just my reading of the data that we have.
I think that captured my thoughts exactly, but again, it's not, the struggle is that we know there is more context than we know, but we have, this is the, I'm sure we have it.
And I have complete faith that when we're here next year looking at the same thing, that based on the leadership of the administration statement, that even with the same indicators we have now, we're gonna see that reasonable progress, because I like leadership.
And I'm clear, you had opened this up, that if we were looking just at the monitoring report, what does the monitoring report show us?
Correct, yeah, and I stand by what I said at the beginning of that. If we're just going, the really indicating within our work report, no reasonable expectations. So then actually checking out the spot there. But also, I want to make sure that the kind of real story was happening in the should be business story as well, and especially those, I don't want to leave any place that our students are not, that's not
So is there an amendment to the motion, or do we move on to the motion?
I just wanted to bring it again. I think my frustration is that I'm probably gonna vote for this the way that you said, that it's not meeting expectations or whatever that designation is. Even though I know that we've made a lot of improvements, all countries have made a lot of improvements, I see it in the schools. This data is not capturing. I think if you layer over the conversations you brought up to a couple months ago about what is statistical significance, and we apply like the end values to these data sets, I don't think there's any way this data is ever going to show statistically significant improvements, because the bar for that is going to be like 8 or 9%. To move the bar 8 or 9%, you know, like I think it's something to be celebrated. We got 10 more kids to move out of the threshold for the meeting the benchmark. You know, 8 or 9%, if we're going for statistical significance on this sample size, is like, you know, 80 or 90 kids potentially. Like that's that's a lot. And to hold us to that standard, it's not that standard is too high, it's that it's inappropriate, because we're not seeing the successes that we have. And actually, we're missing some of the potential failures elsewhere that we might have. So I'm eager to have a conversation around whether we need what we think we need for this. But I think for now we vote the way it is. And I'm just frustrated about that. Because we've had some big wins in literacy.
I think this has been one of the most important conversations we've had as a board, and monitoring our results is our job. And evaluating whether or not we're doing a good job of that is the board's responsibility. Are we personally setting up a system that is telling the story? And then we are, I think, struggling with, did we do that for you all, or to follow suit? So that's my, I'm struggling, because I know this doesn't tell the story, but because of the, I think there has to be just the fidelity to the process and changing the process as we move forward. This is part of the growth of it. I don't feel like we can build on anything other than this and based on this.
Thank God you guys are making the right leadership moves, because I don't think we set you guys up for success.
Refinements.
Yeah.
So is there a motion to modify? So at this point, we have a motion on the table to accept as presented. Is there a motion to modify? But right now it's accept, achieve reasonable progress with exceptions. Are you good with that, or do you?
I'm good with that. There's some big exceptions, but I'm good with that.
I feel like that waters down what we can do with this. And I know
You know, I feel like there's been reasonable progress on leadership groups.
yes.
Not reasonable progress on outcomes. So that's where I'm grappling. Like, are results strictly outcomes, or is it the intangibles? Because we were told in governance, like, we need to get out of qualitative and procedural, but yet there's been enormous progress in systems and structures. So that is what I'm not sure what
So I think you captured it, though. I would rather reword this. First of all, I think
Yeah.
everything that you said is on point, but I'd rather reword this as we're either meeting goals or making reasonable progress to the goals, but the goals are not yet. Like,
Yeah.
That makes more sense to me and it feels more, authentic, quite honestly. So that's what I'm.
We go on that.
Can we
See,
check
that,
the
that
language?
again seems more like a, let's go forward.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
We'll work on it in the workshop.
So I think there's maybe some things that, we would want to circle back from my perspective, this is a thought. I would like to hear, I'm sure this is a good conversation for leadership to kind of hash out and how we move forward from this, because I think we're all struggling for a reason to do this.
But one of the things that I think it would be good us to, of course, Virgil, and again, we learned and we do better. This has been a phenomenal discussion, one of the most powerful discussions we've had around literacy. And the way that we are presenting and talk about data is not the way we do it. And so I think it's a good opportunity for us to begin to structure it where it's that way.
Yeah.
And then it's here, and this is after the issue, they see the future. Well, obviously, we can't go student name over the piece, but more of the structure.
So I think we're at a point where I think the board is struggling to vote to accept this, presented with, progress with exceptions versus the, more punitive language of failing to achieve reasonable progress. That's my sense. And do we want to go ahead and just take the vote on as presented and see if we have majority?
Can we table this report till after our workshop and we reconsider the language of the criteria? Or is that the time you voting on the item?
I don't think it would be anything that we need to do. It would be us changing the language of the, screen law. The three, yeah. No, not for the,
Not for
certification.
the-
Yeah, so I think that's what I'm actually struggling, so I didn't want to say we had failed, because I see so many areas that this is.
Well, just for the record, it doesn't say it here. It just says,
failing.
no, mine doesn't say it. Did y'all change it?
So I may
I'm
be
in the same
working-
doc.
No, I may be working with what I thought was the working document. Does it say reasonable
Progress
progress?
was not achieved. I'm looking
Yes,
at the
but I
same.
thought that was mine. I apologize.
Oh.
Yes, that's well.
It does say fail.
It's so,
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the one you are, because it was linked in the slides.
I think,
Because that was like, I could do that one, but, yeah.
I based it on what she was saying, and I was thinking that was my working document, but I didn't realize that it wasn't the document.
this is where I hard copy, I got us locked in. I would actually
change the settings on that.
Is the board going to vote to change this phrase for every single report?
I think that's
So
I think that's too.
just vote on it tonight, and then in the workshop, we can discuss, I'm gonna abstain that.
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah,
What I
but-
think what we should do is, I think John, you mentioned tabling this, and then we can have a further discussion, because I don't even think that we're at a place where we can, after this whole robust discussion, even vote authentically on any of these. Is there anything, Joe, do you have, I think you have a different thought. Do you elaborate?
Well, I guess the wording of that third line doesn't, to me, change what I'm gonna propose. I kind of agree with what Nicole said. I feel like we could just vote on it tonight, and if at the workshop we change it, we can change it retroactively to all our other reports.
Do you want to make a motion to modify the amendments on the table?
I'd be happy to make that motion. I move to modify the report, let's say, failing to achieve reasonable progress.
Is there a second for that? Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. That motion is now actually on the table. Are we ready to vote? All in favor of Joe's motion to accept the report with the modification of failing to achieve reasonable progress, signify with aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. In that case, we are.
I'd like to abstain.
Abstention. In that case, we are going to, we just take care of voting on the report. However, I want to make sure that we are clear in our notes that we want to review and reevaluate the certification language moving forward, that maybe can be used retroactively, if we do that at the December 4th workshop, and those are what we could possibly use. And then I think we circle back at a different time to kind of talk about, do the indicators are they capturing, but I think we want to make sure there's plenty of time for the discussions that need to happen there, because I want to make sure that the work that's going on is honored and demonstrated, and we know that we are, we're in a learning part from the board's perspective, but this is also the part that we want to make sure that we're not going to. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. The conversation
Conversations for
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
We can take a 5-minute break, all right.
Thank you, I was just talking about.
Yes, all right, 5-minute break, we'll be back at 6:20. Thank you, everybody, for the good break and for the marathon session. We are determined to make it through the entire NFL game. I'm so sorry, Chad. And
Maybe you guys can see a quick update.
with that, we'll put it back over to the superintendent's reports and.
Thank you. So next we're going to move into, we provided our general seclusion restricted data maybe 6 weeks ago. Something like that. But we wanted to go deeper into the discussion and talk more along the lines of the data that shows our numbers, but really tell a more thorough story of how we got there, and also break our data down into grade bands to be able to have some good discussion around where some of the incidents may be happening. Also, we're very cautious of not going so deep that we unintentionally provide any context of the individual family or families, and so being very thoughtful about that as well. So, everyone knows that Dr. Hubbard from the previous presentation, like they introduced Carly Adams. If you've not been able to meet Carly, does a phenomenal job with our behavior in our district, and works with a multitude of spaces and cities. Walk to a building, she'll be in one of those spaces, and we are thankful for not just being here, but all the work and progress we made, especially with our systems for supporting students with higher needs for support around the area. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Albert.
All right, thank you. What a great discussion today. And just as we think about it, a couple of things that resonated with me that I want to start is one that Becky Clarity said, proficiency doesn't follow the calendar, nor does social emotional learning, especially for our young students. Also, Adam talked a little bit about providing a foundation at our younger years. And what you're going to see today is indicative of that, and where some of our younger learners might not be quite ready for the school environment the way it is currently laid out. And so the data will show that as well. So what we're going to do is we put a few terms up here, and you can see we have seclusion, physical restraint, mechanical restraint up there. I'm not going to go over those terms because they are not new to what we presented in the board document. But the two terms I want to talk about, one is least restricted environment, and the second is continuum of services, because both of these terms really are indicative and are important as we discuss seclusion and restraint. So when we talk about the least restricted environment, it really means that students learn to the greatest extent possible along with their peers in the general education setting. It is our belief that students should be in the classroom with their peers, but we also know that for some students that is not their least restricted environment. When that happens, we then move to environments that would include some time outside of the classroom, and we keep going until we find where they're successful. And for some students, it may be full-time outside of the classroom. That may be their least restricted environment. We never start there, but we just kind of go. There's no one prescription that can be used to help identify what a least restrictive environment is, and it's really determined by the IEP team. The next one is really looking at a continuum of service. And this refers to an array of services and supports that are provided by our students. When we think about continuum of service, we obviously think about push-in, and that's being in the classroom full-time, as well as support being provided outside of the classroom or in that pull-out type of setting. The thing that's important to think about with the continuum of service is that it includes providing education within the home school in our school setting. But we also want to look at if that's not working for some students, what else are we offering? Providing schooling in different settings outside of the home school environment. At this time, we do not have options for students that are outside of the school, home school environment. And in a district this size, that's unusual. And so we really want to focus, and part of our large leadership moves is to help develop that extended learning pathways, which you'll hear as one of our leadership moves. So as I go through this, what I want to do is I want to bring to light kind of the life and kind of a story about seclusion and restraint. And I'm going to center my granddaughter in this space. So bear with me as I tell this story here. So I'm going to be reading it so I can highlight some key points. So Chloe is on our boat, one of her favorite places to be, and she lives in Illinois, and she's going to be turning 4 in 2 weeks. Now, if she lived in our district, she would be in the pre-K program. She would have an IEP for speech and for general developmental delays. When Chloe was 3.5, she lost her mom to cancer. Dang. Yeah. Nope, I got it. So for the first 3.5 years of her life, she spent all her days with her mom and her dad. I can count the number of hours that she was not with her parents. She did not go to daycare, and her mom was her caretaker. You got my back for that. After her mom died, she did go to daycare. She went to an in-home daycare with 3 children, and she did just fine. The in-home daycare, unfortunately, did not have any openings once school started, so Chloe transferred to the only daycare in our hometown that had openings, and that happened late in June. It had about 50 kids in the daycare in multiple classrooms with multiple staff. If you think about her environment and the amount of shifts and the amount of new people that were entering her life, it was very, very hard for her. So Chloe did not feel safe in this large environment. She clung on to her dad every day, and once her dad left, she tried to go after him and run after him by leaving the building. To keep her safe, they had to use restraints. If they didn't, she would run and she would be alone. This happened just about every day for 5 months. In our terms, that's a half of a school year. She would also hit and kick students when she was angry because her language skills were limited. She had to intervene with removals from the classroom, restraints, and sometimes seclusions. At recess, she'd go to the far corner in the fenced-in playground, but she wouldn't come in. Staff often had to pick her up and bring her inside. If she were in kindergarten, we don't have fenced-in playgrounds. She would have been old, and there would have been more restraints. So for Chloe, the classroom was too big. The staffing in the classroom changed several times. She needed a small environment with consistent staff. When she was in the home setting, she was successful. It was small, it was a predictable location with predictable students and adults. With maybe a little bit of guidance from me, the daycare changed her environment and they moved her to a smaller classroom with younger peers because the classroom for her age wasn't the least restrictive environment. So we had to be flexible. When students are not finding success in school, Harley taught me, modify the environment, modify the staff. When they modified the environment and kept staffing and routines consistent, her behavior slowly changed. 2 weeks ago, she successfully walked into the daycare to sit and go play with my friends. Then we had to support my son. Because he didn't need her anymore. But I share this story because every student has a story, and we need to figure that out. If you look at the picture on the left, think about trauma-informed practices. And one of the things I think about is that many students are carrying an invisible backpack. And so Chloe had an invisible backpack that she carried grief, insecurity, and fear that others would envy her. She slowly added other things to her backpack that were very positive, but it took 5 months of consistency and consistently holding the line, as I would tell my son, don't give up and you got this. For students in Verona, we need to determine what students are bringing into their invisible backpack and alter the environments and find ways to best serve our students. So I tell you that story so that as we look at our data, and you see it here, think about every one of our students as somebody like Chloe. And so when you look at our data, seclusion and restraint information is documented in Power School when there's a major office disciplinary failure. We know that staff have been trained on nonviolent crisis intervention, and Harley does that once a month, which is a new system that we put in place. So anytime staff are trained or hired, they are trained within 3 to 4 weeks of being new to the job. But what is especially important to look at is at the elementary, we are consistently documenting our office discipline referrals, which in turn means we are consistently documenting our seclusion and restraints. When we looked at our data last year, we knew there was an increase in our office discipline referrals. So we would expect an increase in our elementary and in the number of seclusion and restraints because we know that it doesn't happen. Additionally, we would expect slightly higher numbers at the elementary level because our students are learning school routines and they're understanding how to follow the school expectations. That just takes time. So at the elementary, last year when we published data, there were approximately 2,500 students enrolled. There were 16 students who experienced seclusion and restraints. The 16 students had 111 episodes of seclusion and or restraints. Of the 16 students, most of them had unique circumstances, very similar to Chloe. We would dive into the story just like we dove into Chloe's story for all 16 kids to fully understand the why and to develop their program. There were medical concerns. There were life factors beyond their control, very similar to Chloe, or they had a history of trauma, just to name a few examples. Many of the students also had IEPs where we had to understand and honor the neurodiversity of the students as we were developing the program. So I want to share just a couple of the other notices as we look at the data. At the elementary level, you see that there are 111 incidents. With that, 43 students, 43 of the incidents were at the kindergarten level. Some of our students at the kindergarten level did not have an IEP when they entered into kindergarten. And so, as a result, we really didn't have any idea of the students and like the pre-planning and helping them. We also want to think about when a student comes into our setting, we could start an evaluation for an IEP. It takes 90 days. So by the time you do an evaluation, that's 60 days, and then you have 30 more days in which to write an IEP. We take it really seriously because we don't want to jump into saying that a child has a disability. So if you would go back to Chloe, she was identified as having a speech delay prior to her non-passing. If we would have completed an evaluation during those last 5 months, we would have had a very different picture of Chloe and a different diagnosis that probably would have been accurate given who she is and where she's at. So we have to balance let's have an IEP with the staffing that comes with it, with letting the child just naturally learn the environment. So last year and this year, some of our kindergarten students needed more support learning how to participate in the school environment. I was just at a national conference, and this was a really common topic at that national conference. Nationally, there's a trend where we see an increase in the social emotional learning and the needs of our students due to the pandemic. But what they said is that it's disproportionately affecting our young children due to less access to the early social experiences. So as we see our kinders, it's not just Verona, it's a national trend that people are seeing. So we need to adjust and accommodate the new norm of what a kindergarten class looks like. Adam has been doing a great job with our Verona area for 5 years, as well as Carly, in helping to develop some programs. So actually last year, we knew that we had some students that did not have an IEP, but we were projecting that there was they were going to need more support as they entered into kindergarten. So we added additional support, additional systems, even though they did not have an IEP. And they were much more successful this year in turning into kindergarten with the staff being prepared than they were in the past. So we are working really closely with the Verona area for 5 years and the principals to improve the transitions for the incoming kindergarten students. This includes enhancing those the visual supports, using more PPIS, and really having a multi-system of support for that social and emotional aspect so that all students can get what they need. Another noticing that we've had in the data is that we have some situations where we were not able to provide success for our students in their home school. We tried. We actually have some data where we did interviews with families who said it wasn't for a lack of effort, but we just didn't feel like we could move forward. And that's what we are seeing. We move the students to a less restricted environment. Students generally have a one-on-one adult support or a two-on-one adult support, and they are in a special education setting most of the day. Students fitting this profile account for 50 of the 111 seclusions in districts. We did not have the environment that was allowing the student to be successful. there are some students that have gone out to the private program. And it takes time to find that site. And it takes resources for some of our families to find that site. And so at this time, we do not have anything that's different from the homeschooling to the outside private program. And that's one of the things that we're really focusing on, is looking at the extended learning pathways for students. So over the last 2 years, we've had several things that we are working on to develop our systems. You hear a lot of system talk tonight, and this is no different. And so, and our leadership needs always focus on these two concepts: modify the people, working with the student, and modify the environment. I think we say that in every meeting. And so, our leadership needs include working with our principals, and at the elementary, principals will be viewing our preschool sites to see what they look like, and with the goal of replicating what's at the preschool site for our kindergarten classrooms. We're also piloting select curriculum that explicitly teaches skills related to behavior and social emotional regulation. Knowing that we're piloting SAVERS, which is a universal screening for social emotional learning. We're enhancing and continuing to use second step. And then we are using everyday speech, which is a more intensive intervention that we have found successful for our negative items. We're also increasing the knowledge and the communication of essential skills. So all of our principals and our student services have been trained. And we are working on having them participate in learning to their staff in a way that is meaningful for their schools. We have Carly, who is working closely with the team, and students have 2 or more events related to seclusion and restraint. And the work focuses on adjusting programs for students and also teaching staff how to support students even prior to using the seclusion restraints. Carly's in the classroom working hand in hand with the teachers to develop the skills. And then lastly, we're working to expand our continuing services for students within the elementary as well as the secondary schools. We're exploring extended learning pathways, and we are hoping to share more information with you on this in January. So to continue to add to what Dr. Holbert was saying, this work around seclusion and restraint directly supports OE10 and OE11. When we think about our learning environment, we think about our instructional programs, how do we provide an environment that's safe for all students to learn and be successful? And then just to also point out, LRE, when she's talking about the least restrictive environment, it is fluid, so it is based on data. So just because you may find yourself, a student may find themselves in this placement based on strategies and the work that the staff do, students, the continuum is fluid. And so it doesn't mean once you're there, you're always here. And as she spoke to the little one, I mean, had she been faced in where they thought based on her behaviors that she demonstrated, she would have been here. But again, she moved on the continuum. So that's the goal. You know, we provide the students the skills necessary through instruction, through modifying the environment, modifying to allow them to move. So it's good. So, that's it, Carly.
Any questions related? Yeah.
I have a couple questions. First, more of a comment. I really appreciate, Dr. Halbert, that you called out how much time IEP plans take to make. I think that's a really important thing for everyone in our community, just to understand that if we had unlimited staff, we could screen every single kindergartner that came into our school. Or every parent who asks, but that is just not the case and we don't want to rush those through. So I appreciate you highlighting that. I have two questions. One, you spoke a lot about extended learning pathways and outside of our home school. Could you talk more about, like, are we considering as a district a separate building for a different learning environment for students that are having issues learning? Like, when you're talking about, we are a large district that doesn't have a space outside of a home school. Speaking in street terms, homeschool to me means you don't send your kids to public school, you homeschool them, right? And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what school you're zoned in, like as your district, right? So can you talk about, are we talking about what some might call alternative schools in other districts, or are you talking about some other sort of alternative method or offering?
So we're going to eliminate the word alternative.
Sure.
Because that has a negative connotation in schooling. And so that's why we're choosing to say extended, because we know that there are some students, as Dr. Helbert said, you know, the classroom, that environment is too large. And so what are opportunities that we can provide for them that personalize the learning experience for them? So could it include learning someplace else in our district? It could. But it is still their home district, here within the confines of Verona. But then I will say, as Dr. Hilbert said, there are times when students need something even more intense, smaller, and so we do then look outside of our district for even more personalized opportunities for students. It was one of the opportunities we called out in our annual academic report to say, hey, we realize that we have to come up with opportunities for our students, both at secondary and both at elementary, because there are students who need a smaller setting. We've used various places within our district. Known as a catering, we call it, we use some rooms in our for catering, to provide a smaller environment.
Like a dedicated space.
It was a dedicated space within our district that was quieter, that, again, you're trying to control the environment. If you are in a very large, a very busy elementary, and you're sitting where you're stimulated, sometimes having a very quiet environment with more sensory opportunities, you're going to be available to then learn the grade level standards. And so it's finding a way to explicitly teach the social emotional skills so that we can have them go and participate with their peers to be instructed at grade level standards.
I appreciate that, and I think just as kind of a note, when we're giving different verbiage, better verbiage, I do think it benefits us to at least pause, just for our general community's understanding, and say, we're not saying alternative school, we're saying better. We're saying all these positive connotations, because I think the way you just described it is fantastic. It might be that, it might be something else, it might be something even more creative, so I appreciate that, that makes a ton of sense. And my second question was, you mentioned kind of having a better transition from the VAFI program into kindergarten. I was wondering if you know how much of our school district enrolls in VAFI, because I know my family personally did not find any of those programs suitable because there was no wraparound here. And I know a lot of families feel that same way. A lot of families don't have another alternative. And so I was wondering, how much of our population does that serve? I don't have a great idea for how to get to the people not in that program, because like, what are you gonna do, go to every daycare and be like, hey, can you talk to your kids?
Yes.
Maybe you do. So I guess that's kind of my question, like, what is the makeup of kids who are in VAFI, and then like, are there any creative ideas to get kids who aren't enrolled in those programs?
And that's where the continued discussion that happens, we can take a group, I guess, a group of people who are having those discussions, right? Of like, is the child find enough? Are we getting the student information that we need? I know that early childhood has a long history of going to sites that we know have a lot of students who enroll in our district but aren't currently in our district. And talking to families, I know that they say, well, you might be in our district always. Let us help you in our district, so I can send a supervisor, everyone can call us. So that gives a lot of really great systems in place to help find students that might not be enrolled in our pre-K programs. There's mailings that go out, we were just talking about maybe not December, next month, yeah. So yeah, a lot of those pieces of we can't support students if we don't know about them. We can't be thoughtful in our planning if we don't know who they are and what they need. In the processes by which that's done right now is still being uncovered, I would say, by us and like the big world. Like, how do you do this so that we can also support?
Seems like a huge challenge.
Oh,
Does not seem like an easy solution whatsoever, so I appreciate all of it. Okay, those are my questions.
So, again, so many thoughts on the kind of self-select. When I hear you talking about least restrictive environment, I mean, I know that's like a legal term for the idea that is a standard for health. What I hear you talking about more is finding the most successful environment for students, and that being a very delicate balancing act. When we talk about these, finding the best environment, and maybe that's not in someone's home school, and the difference in language, I think it's important to point out that the difference in language isn't just a branding thing, hopefully, but that it's because it arises from a different process. Like many of the pitfalls that come with alternative schools and the negative connotations that come from that came because the processes that one went through to get there were flawed, deeply flawed processes, deeply biased, deeply flawed. Particularly as you have, historically, the range of students that qualified for IEPs moved from students that might be experiencing cognitive delays or challenges to students that are experiencing behavioral and emotional challenges. Those are very different categories. And if you're talking about historically having alternative schools where a lot of students are being shunted there through flawed processes, that's one thing. What I like that I'm hearing here is that it starts with there being maybe a different process around how we're looking for the most successful environment for our students, not just academically, but also socially, emotionally. What I want to make sure is that we're also talking about some sort of gradual release to then move back, so that a more social environment can also be a successful environment. Because I get very, my hackles get raised when we start talking about anything like that. So yeah, legit. So yeah, this all sounds really good. I'm really excited to hear about it, and I'd love to elaborate it at another time.
Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your story and helping us at the board table keep students at the center of all these efforts. It's very, very helpful and very appreciated.
Yeah, and if it's okay, Dr. Hallberg, I might kind of phrase my wondering almost a little bit on your scenario too. Because one of the things that just weighs heavy on me, I appreciate that we were able to again tell a story about this data and be able to understand numbers in relation to the human factor. And my struggle is imagining Chloe or one of our kindergarten students through this learning process that we have to do. And I understand the philosophy and logic behind the learning process. But if I'm a new kindergartner in school and I'm experiencing 30 or 40 seclusion and restraint incidents, that seems like there's trauma that has happened to me as a learner. And so my concern is if a student is coming in with trauma and then that's kind of incidentally what we have to navigate as a school, I feel like we're adding more trauma to that student as a result of those incidents. And so I'm struggling with that. And so just imagining Chloe having all of those situations, how was there not more angst created out of just those multitude of incidents to get to the learning process for the adults involved? And so, and that, and just also an extra framing of my hope is there's deep partnerships with families. We've spent a lot of time talking about our school staffing, all the supports we're doing, but the families, right, are so deeply connected with students and how we're showing up to partner and use insights that is open to them.
And that's why it's so important that we're, really diving into the conversational skills, because the approach can be very different, to even prevent students from messing up. So the use of more visuals and a more consistent environment, she probably would have done better faster. And so once those were implemented, so knowing better and knowing what to do and how to best implement and understanding and asking the questions with the family partnership of, so tell me your story and how and what works for your child, is deeply helpful in all that we do. And I know Carly has gone through the conversational schools, and so as we're looking at our behavior intervention plans, and as we're looking at the work that we're doing to prevent that, incorporate it into a sensitive lens as we are writing our behavior intervention plans, so that we're not doing harm, as we're writing with strategies that might not become sensitive. So that's been a big piece. We also brought in outside people to look at our IEPs from trauma-sensitive clients who are our leaders in the district and say, are we doing everything right? Is there anything else that we need to change in our approach to make sure it's trauma-sensitive?
I'm really excited to hear that, because in other lanes where I exist professionally, I think saying trauma-informed is like a catchy phrase. And what are we doing? Like, how do you quantify some of that? So I appreciate the honesty of building that capacity for staff that though maybe we wish we were historically, that we're really trying to do that with more purpose.
And I think as we talked about all these students, seeing everybody has a really different story and how they have the most purpose, they need, there are themes though, right? There's themes of consistency and predictability of environment and providing those kids a trauma-informed practice, right? So like, all of those pieces and sense of belonging, students can't access learning, they don't have that safety and security is taken out of code. So how are we creating that very consistent, predictable environment while also creating safety in order to teach those social emotional learning objectives? And right now, like, students can't, my favorite example is lovingly called the infinity loop over action recruitment, right? Because you can run through that building indefinitely. It's an infinity loop. So how do we allow students to get that sense of identity seeking in a safe way and building social emotional learning school reviews? You know that today. So I think all those nuances and like what are our themes of these students and how can we really constantly social emotional learning what has been successful in a different environment and building
How many people I am trying to do are getting close to past our 3 hour mark, what I do, or administrators sitting here waiting for tomorrow morning to come. Corby, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say, you hit the nail on the head. Since we got to the slide, I can't stop staring at least restricted environment. Just knowing that Black students are IEPs twice as much as any other group of students historically. And that statement here, learn alongside the general educational peers to the greatest extent possible, that's very important. Because I know that stigma attached that students feel once they are on an IEP, being able to learn alongside their peers is one of those things that really pulls them out of that.
And that goes back to access to great level standards, which is the book that we're doing, which then allows them to Your students are at the heart of the Our feedback from families is that the urgency piece and the speed at which we're providing this continuum, we should be a mitigating factor of how we're making these decisions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a really brief one. First, a comment that I really appreciated this presentation. I think this is how you present data and give context to data to make sure we're responding appropriately and not jumping to the wrong conclusions from the numbers we're looking at. And that this was perfect in that sense. My question is, I heard you talk about an increase kind of nationwide in social emotional challenges among particularly the younger elementary students. My question is, I know that historically, special education assistants and other, staff, that's been one of our hardest areas to fill for staffing. Do we have the resources, both in staff and in other resources that we need to be able to accommodate that observed increase that we can see?
We have been fortunate. Our staffing has been better this year. We really have a full staff, actually. Well, this year, they have made another hire for an SE tonight, so that's good. I think it's always tough. It's a very tough job. The pay isn't as great as it should be for the work that they do, but we also put the pay is good compared to other districts that we have. It's just a really hard job. We do provide coaching, so knowing that it's been hard, if we look at retention, it's to feel good and feel like they have the skills to do their job. So we have programs of great teachers, and part of their job is to do explicit coaching with our paraprofessionals as well as with our special ed teachers. And Carly does a lot of explicit work. When you think about our 16 students, that's really where Carly comes in. If there's multiple repetitions of seclusion and releasing, that's where Carly comes in and really provides that training, models for, models with, improves with, and that's why the work that she does to help you train yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will quickly transition to our last presentation, but I will say that I can't help but to hope that all of you all have been able to see how important all of the work that is happening in academic services. So when we think about our social emotional wellness plans, trauma informed schools, all the work that goes into setting our teachers and our educators up for success so that they can help our students become the best students that we know they have the potential to be. So lastly,
Just a question for us. So as we committed to our updated strategic framework, Dr. Hawkinson, the academic services team did a great job, and also knowing that we were going to be having a very aggressive agenda, both the video that was sent to you in advance. And so instead of going through the full presentation, we ask questions based on the video because they have basic snapshots, the slides. Instead of, you already saw it, it's saying something about the slide version.
absolutely, that's exactly what I was going to say. In addition to next month, you'll be able to hear more details about inclusive teaching and learning, specifically our instructional framework, our teaching and learning framework, our teaching and learning plan, our teaching and learning framework. There you go. We've got multiple frameworks. But next month, we're going to bring our teaching and learning team. We're going to talk to you all specifically about the work around developing our teaching and learning framework. And additionally, in the following month, we'll bring our student agency team, and they'll talk specifically about the work in OSS. So it was highlighted in the video, but you'll be able to hear more details and ask more questions. So what questions might you have for us tonight?
Just a little bit of thought, and I don't know how to phrase this. I watched the video, it was so well put together, and my logic educator background brain was like, and then I took this step back and I was like, well, what does all that mean? like, what does this actually look like? And I felt this craving for sort of the like, simplify it for me. So what's happening with this? But I think that's like a little bit of feedback, is I very intellectually appreciate all that this is lifting up in terms of what we're doing. And I felt this just wondering of like, so if I had to go turn around and just tell someone, what are we doing within our strategic framework right now? I'm struggling to put it into words that give me like a little elevator pitch. Does that make sense?
No, it does.
And so just thinking about that from the community's sake and everything of like, so what does this actually look like kind of tangibly right now in a way that just feels easier to hold on to with, I don't know.
I think I had the same impression, and that's what I was trying to get at with the extended framework. It was not a comment on PR. It was a comment on, there's a difference between, we can't be so academic about new phrases that it leaves our community behind in terms of just, for example, here's what, and I think that a great example is like, and now the phrase is escaping me, but like, grade appropriate education in classrooms, right? You're trying to preempt the question of like, well, what are we doing before? And it was, oh, no, that was always there, but the scaffolding piece and things like that, I don't have a good suggestion, but just to the point of like, I think it's just a question of how do we bring our community along and have those succinct talking points, because it's all amazing stuff.
So 8 minutes is a lot of information. And so what I hear you saying is put it in layman's terms, and perhaps maybe narrow, because I think in the video, we called out all of the objectives that we're working on so that people have a full understanding of the work that we're doing, but we certainly could narrow it and perhaps highlight the most important and help people understand and perhaps provide examples of what it looks like in the classroom.
If I can, I remember going in, being part of the strategic planning group when we had already hammered out the 5 areas, much important work on other people's behalf. And then I was part of the group that came in and still talked about what are these things. And one of the activities we did is like put sticky notes on chart paper for each one all around about like, what does this look like? What does value and belonging look like? What does this sort of stuff look like? And there are a lot of ideas up there, and I can't recall any of them right now, but there are a lot of ideas up there. But I think the important thing, in speaking to what you're asking about, is it's hard to give concrete examples when we're at a stage when we've got this guiding material to ask that question. What does this look like in the classroom? And I imagine that a lot of the teachers that were there and the principals that were there are well on their way to figuring out exactly what it looks like. But then later, you have those examples of like, this is what we've implemented and done, because this was important to us. And there's an example of what it is. Because I remember walking in and feeling kind of adrift in that process because it wasn't concrete. It was just about finding the right questions. And now we're kind of at a phase where we've found these questions that we've settled on for the next 5 years. But I'm not sure that we have those concrete things just yet.
So I think that's fair.
Did you mention that you were going to be coming back and talking to us about some more robust recipes?
Yes, so next month, this is a teaching and learning, you're gonna come, and the feedback that you all are giving will make sure that we look towards and tangible, here's what it looks like. So you'll hear from teaching and learning, and then the following month, you'll hear from student education.
That seems great. I think since we have a hard stop at 10, and we have some heavy closed sessions, I want to make sure if there's anything that is absolutely critical to ask tonight, let's get that out. But otherwise, I would love to have questions held, we can come back and sit together next month, and we can even maybe if there's anything that comes up, we can remember this, but I think this is going to close this Tuesday. And we'll
Absolutely, so stop talking.
It's for your, no, we would like to be able to do
Just tell me.
I got you.
Thanks for all your work on it. It's not to minimize it.
But no, the feedback that you all just provided in the few minutes will certainly help us as we tailor our presentations in the next two presentations. So no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the video is great for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very. Let's move on. Do we have any public comments? Yeah, we're good, okay. With that, we have a board, just a board action. I'm gonna ask for all board, updates to be held for our next meeting, just bringing it up and stuff. But Nicole, can you give just a quick date, update on dates for the election?
So starting December 1, folks can start circulating the nomination papers. Just to note, you can pick up any packets at central office. Someone will be there to provide those to you. And then the deadline for incumbents to file a notice of non-candidacy is 5 p.m. on the 22nd. And then you have the whole month of December to collect signatures. Those signatures are due January 2nd. And then an important note to everyone looking, please make sure, and we'll repeat more in depth, maybe at a future meeting, we'll repeat some common gotchas during the board updates when we have more time. So December 1st is when you can start collecting signatures.
And importantly, what we have up to election in April, there are 2 at-large seats, and then there's one outside the cities of Pittsburgh and Verona. The seats have a 40 is an at-large, then is at-large, the cities outside of the cities of Pittsburgh and Verona. At this point, we have incumbents that will be running, but we know, sure if anyone in our community is interested in being a candidate for the April election, please be sure to follow Nicole's information so you can pick up information and get some interest started. So thank you for that. Next, let's see, we have our superintendent consent agenda. So we have a chance to review any questions, any concerns. Hearing none, superintendent's consent agenda is approved as presented. Board's consent agenda, any questions, concerns? Hearing none, board's consent agenda is also approved as presented. Taking a look at our future agenda items, please keep in mind we have a board workshop. Yeah. December 4th, we have a board workshop that starts at 5 p.m. In the quiet study, followed then by our regular meeting at 6:30. Please, board members, we will also be having a closed session for our superintendent evaluation. Please keep an eye on your inboxes within the next probably, well, a full week at least before there'll be just some pre-thinking then as for board members. But again, 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock on 4. With that, any questions on future agenda items? With that, is there a motion to adjourn to closed session for Wisconsin statute 19.85 sub 1 sub G to confer with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, liability insurance claim regarding student injury claims 1 and 2. Is there a motion? Motion from Joe, is there a second? Second from John, all in favor, signify with aye. Actually, with Joe.
Aye.
Cory.
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
Nicole.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
One opposed.
Aye.
Aye. I'm aye as well. We are officially in closed session. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time, and we will move into closed session.